They say the strongest chains aren't made of iron, they're made of silence. Alpha King Kale Varen is about to discover that truth the hard way. In the deepest cell of his own dungeon sits a woman who should be screaming her innocence. Instead, she's quiet. Too quiet. And that silence is about to shatter everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and the kingdom he swore to protect. Stay with us until the end to see how one broken Omega brings an entire empire to its knees. Drop a comment with your city and let us know you're watching. Hit that like button, you won't regret it. The torches in the dungeon corridor burned with an oily, reluctant light that made the shadows dance like living things. Kael Varen descended the stone steps slowly, each footfall echoing against walls that had swallowed 1,000 screams. He'd made this walk before, too many times, if he was honest, but tonight felt different. The air down here was wrong, thick, like breathing through wet wool. Your Majesty, I really must advise against this. Counselor Thorne's voice came from behind him, nervous and pleading in a way that set Kael's teeth on edge. The prisoner is unstable, dangerous. We've already conducted a thorough interrogation. There's no need for you to... To what? Kael didn't turn around. To see the traitor with my own eyes? To hear her crimes from her own mouth? He paused on the landing, finally glancing back at the older man. Or are you suggesting I should execute my subjects based solely on your word? Thorne's jaw worked silently. His hand, thin, liver-spotted, gripped his staff so hard the knuckles went white. Of course not, Your Majesty. I simply meant, then let's proceed. The guard at the bottom of the stairs fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking badly enough that it took 3 tries to unlock the final door. Kael noticed the tremor. Noticed, too, the way the young man's eyes darted everywhere except toward the cell at the end of the corridor. Fear, raw and unreasoning. Kael had seen battle-hardened soldiers face down rogues without flinching, but this kid looked ready to bolt. How long has she been down here? 4 months, sire. The guard's voice cracked. Give or take. 4 months. The reports had said 3 weeks. The door groaned open, revealing a corridor even darker than the one behind them. The smell hit him immediately, not the expected reek of human waste and unwashed bodies, but something else. Something chemical and wrong, like burnt metal and rotting flowers mixed together. It coated the back of his throat, made his wolf stir uneasily beneath his skin. The torches, Kael said quietly. Why aren't they lit? Another pause. The guard looked to Thorne, who stepped forward with that oily smile he wore during council meetings. The prisoner has sensitivities, Your Majesty. Light causes her distress. We found it more humane to light the torches. Your Majesty, now! The guard scrambled to obey, and as each torch flared to life, Kael began to understand why they'd preferred the dark. The cell at the end of the corridor wasn't like the others. Where the other cells had simple iron bars, this one was wrapped in chains, not just across the door, but around it, over it, welded into the stone itself in patterns that looked almost ritualistic. Symbols had been carved into the walls, and Kael recognized some of them. Binding marks. Suppression runes. The kind of magic you used on someone dangerous, or someone you wanted to keep powerless. What is this? His voice came out harder than he'd intended. Precautions, Your Majesty. Thorne had moved closer, hovering at his elbow like a nervous bird. As I mentioned, the prisoner is extremely dangerous. The bindings are necessary to open it. Sire, I really must protest. I said open it. The chains came down with a sound like breaking bones, each lock releasing with a click that seemed too loud in the oppressive silence. The door swung inward, and Kael stepped through into a space that felt less like a cell and more like a tomb. She was in the corner. At first, he almost didn't see her. The shadows clung to her like a living thing, and she was so still that she might have been carved from the same stone as the walls. But then she shifted, just barely, and the torchlight caught on metal. Chains. Everywhere. Not just on her wrists and ankles, but wrapped around her torso, her throat, even woven through her hair. The iron was old, rusted in places, and where it touched her skin there were burns. Fresh ones, still weeping. Kael's wolf snarled inside him, furious and confused. Iron didn't burn like that, not unless it was enchanted, not unless someone had made it specifically to hurt. Lyra Ashen. His voice echoed in the small space. Stand up. She didn't move. Didn't even acknowledge he'd spoken. I said stand up. Nothing. Her head stayed bowed, dark hair falling forward to hide her face. In the reports, the ones Thorne had presented to the council, they described her as rebellious, defiant, a firebrand who'd tried to rally the Omegas against their betters, who'd spread lies about the council, who'd practiced dark magic in secret. The woman in front of him looked like she'd forgotten what defiance was. Your Majesty, as you can see, she's quite unresponsive. Thorne had followed him in, keeping carefully to the doorway. The interrogations have been taxing. Perhaps it would be better to... How was she interrogated? I'm sorry? Kale turned to look at him directly. You said the interrogations were taxing. I want to know what methods were used. Thorne's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Standard procedures, Your Majesty. Nothing untoward, simply persistent questioning and the occasional application of iron burns. The silence that followed was deafening. Those are suppression chains, Kyle continued, his voice dangerously soft, spelled specifically to hurt shifters, to keep them from accessing their wolves. They're outlawed except in cases of extreme danger to the pack, yes. Thorne straightened his robes, recovering his composure, which this prisoner certainly qualifies as. The evidence we've collected is overwhelming. She conspired with rogues, practiced blood magic, attempted to poison. Then why isn't she dead? That stopped him. Your Majesty? If the evidence is so overwhelming, why am I just now hearing about her? Why has she been down here for 4 months? He let that number hang in the air. When pack law requires a trial within 2 weeks of arrest? Kale took a step toward the counselor. Why does this feel less like justice and more like a secret? Thorne's face went very still. Behind him, Kale heard the guard shift nervously, armor creaking. Your Majesty has been very busy with the Northern Territories. We didn't want to trouble you with executing one of my subjects without my knowledge? How considerate. We were simply waiting for the right time to get out. Thorne blinked. I'm sorry? Get out, both of you. I want to speak to the prisoner alone. Your Majesty, I cannot in good conscience leave you alone with... Then it's fortunate I'm not asking for your permission. Kael's voice dropped into the register he used on the battlefield, the one that made grown men remember they were talking to an alpha. Leave, now. They went. Thorne with reluctance painted all over his face, the guard with obvious relief. The door closed behind them with a final sounding clang, and Kael was alone with the woman who supposedly wanted him dead. He waited until their footsteps faded completely before speaking again. They're gone. He kept his voice level, non-threatening. You can drop the act now. Still nothing. But he caught it this time, the smallest hitch in her breathing. She'd heard him. The Tsem. Kael moved closer, careful to make noise, to give her warning. The last thing he wanted was to spook her. Up close, he could see more details. The chains weren't just wrapped around her, they were embedded in places, the metal having cut so deep it had started to scar over. Her clothes were rags, barely holding together. Her skin was a map of bruises in various stages of healing, some fresh, some old enough to have turned that sickly yellow-green. But it was her scent that made him stop cold. Every shifter had a scent unique as a fingerprint. It told you their mood, their health, their place in the pack. This woman's scent should have told him if she was lying, if she was afraid, if she was plotting something. Instead, he got nothing. Or worse than nothing. Her scent was wrong, layered with something dark and oily that made his wolf recoil. It reminded him of battlefields 3 days after the fighting stopped, of sickness, of rot. What did they do to you? The question came out before he could stop it. Her head came up, just slightly, just enough for him to see her eyes. They were gray, storm gray, with flecks of silver that caught the light like shattered glass. And they were empty, not in the way of someone who'd given up. Emptiness would have been a mercy. No, these eyes were hollow, scraped clean of everything that made a person human. Looking into them was like looking into a well with no bottom. She studied him for a long moment, and Kael had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured by something that wasn't entirely present. Then her lips moved. The sound that came out was barely a whisper, scraped raw by disuse. You're not supposed to be here. Her voice hit him like a physical blow. Not because it was loud or angry or any of the things he'd expected, but because it was resigned, tired, like she'd already accepted that whatever was going to happen next was inevitable and beyond her control. "I'm the Alpha King," Kyle said, keeping his tone gentle. "I go where I please." "No." She shook her head slowly, the chains clinking. "You're not supposed to see." "See what?" Instead of answering, she turned her head toward the wall. No, not the wall. The marks carved into it, the binding symbols. From this angle, Kyle could see they formed a pattern, a circle that enclosed the entire cell with her at its center. "Do you know what a sin eater is, Your Majesty?" The question came from nowhere, soft and almost curious. Kyle frowned. "That's a myth, an old story to scare children." "Is it?" Something that might have been a smile touched her lips. It was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. Someone who takes on the darkness of others, who absorbs their curses, their sickness, their sins, so the community can stay pure and healthy and safe. Her eyes met his again. "They used to kill sin eaters after, burn them usually, can't have the evidence walking around." Cold understanding began to dawn in Kyle's chest. "You're saying your kingdom is thriving, isn't it?" She spoke over him, her voice growing stronger. "No plague in 3 years, no failed harvests. The northern wars ended with barely any casualties on your side. Your council is healthy, powerful, more unified than ever." She paused. "Doesn't that seem strange? That much good fortune, all at once?" It did. He'd thought about it, actually, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. The kingdom had been struggling for years before his father died. Disease, failed crops, internal fighting that threatened to tear the pack apart. Then he'd taken the throne and suddenly everything had turned around. He'd attributed it to his policies, his leadership, the new council he'd assembled. But looking at this woman, at the burns on her skin and the symbols on the walls and the wrongness that clung to her like a shroud, another explanation began to take shape. "They've been feeding your darkness to me." Lyra's voice was flat now, matter of fact. "Every curse that should have touched the pack. Every sickness, every bad harvest, every stillborn calf, every soldier's wound that should have festered. The council has been channeling it here, into this cell, into me." She lifted her shackled hands slightly. "That's what these are for, to keep me from dying too quickly, to keep me absorbent. That's impossible." But even as he said it, Kyle knew it wasn't. The elders knew magics that most shifters had forgotten, old ways that predated the packs themselves. Blood magic, transfer rituals, things that were forbidden precisely because they worked. "Is it?" Lyra tilted her head. "Then explain the marks on the walls. Explain why my scent is wrong. You noticed that, didn't you? The rot?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's not me. That's every piece of darkness your precious kingdom has shed for the last 4 months, all packed into one very small omega." Kael's mind raced. If this was true, if even half of it was true, then everything he thought he knew about his council, his kingdom, his own success, was built on torture, on the slow destruction of an innocent woman. No. He pushed the thought away. This could still be a trick, an elaborate lie designed to manipulate him. "The charges against you, the evidence of treason, was fabricated." Her interruption was soft but certain. "I wasn't nobility, wasn't important, wasn't anyone who'd be missed. That's why they chose me." She met his eyes again, and this time he saw something flicker there. Not hope. She was too far gone for that. But maybe the ghost of anger. "Ask yourself, Your Majesty, if I'm such a dangerous traitor, why am I still alive? Why go through all this trouble to keep me breathing? Because dead women couldn't absorb curses." The thought arrived fully formed, horrible in its logic. "Who knows about the Kael's voice came out rougher than intended. "The council. All of them? The ones who matter. Thorn, certainly. Mistress Vex. Lord Commander Drayson." She recited the names like a litany. "Maybe others. I stopped keeping track." Those were his inner circle, his most trusted advisors, the people who'd helped him rebuild the kingdom from the ground up, who'd guided his policies and supported his rule, who'd apparently been using him as cover for ritualized torture. "Why are you telling me this?" Kyle asked. "If what you're saying is true, Then I'm complicit. I'm the one whose authority they're using to keep you here." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Because you asked. Because you came down here yourself instead of sending someone else. Because you looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem to be managed." She paused. "And because if I'm going to die, I want one person to know the truth, even if that person is the king I'm dying for." The weight of those words settled over the cell like snow. Kael looked at her, really looked, forcing himself to see past the chains and the scars and the wrongness of her scent. Tried to imagine what she'd been before all this. Young, probably. Omega meant she'd have been small, delicate. Pretty, maybe, in the way that Omegas often were. Someone with a life ahead of her. Now she was this, a breathing grave for his kingdom's sins. The rage that rose in him was white-hot and absolute. Not the quick anger of battle or political maneuvering, but something deeper. Something that came from a place he'd thought he'd buried with his father. This was the fury of someone who'd just realized they'd been played for a fool, that their entire reign was built on suffering they'd been too blind to see. "Can you walk?" The question came out clipped. She blinked at him, confused. "What?" "I asked if you can walk, stand up, move on your own." I don't understand." "Answer the question." Slowly, moving like every joint hurt, Lyra tried to stand. She made it about halfway before her legs gave out, the chains catching her weight with a sound that made Kael wince. She hung there for a moment, breathing hard, then managed to find her feet again. Standing, she was shorter than he'd expected, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. She was also shaking. The tremors ran through her whole body, making the chains rattle. "That's going to be a problem," Kael muttered. He shrugged off his cloak, heavy wool lined with fur, worth more than most people made in a year, and draped it around her shoulders. She flinched at the contact, then stared at him like he'd just performed a miracle. "What are you doing?" "Something incredibly stupid." Kael moved to the wall, examining the binding marks. Up close, he could see they were carved deep, filled with what looked like dried blood. Lyra's blood, probably. The magic hummed against his senses, active and hungry. "These symbols. If I break them, what happens?" "You can't." Lyra's voice climbed with something that might have been panic. "The bindings are what's keeping the curses contained. If you break them without a proper release ritual, everything inside me will flood out at once. It could kill everyone in the castle." "Everyone?" "Everyone within, I don't know, a quarter mile? Maybe more. I've been collecting poison for 4 months, Your Majesty. There's a lot of it." Kael pulled out the knife he kept strapped to his thigh. Military issue, plain and functional. The blade had seen him through a dozen battles. "Then we'll have to be quick. You're not listening to me. If you break those seals—" "I heard you." He tested the point against one of the deeper carvings. "Which is why we're not breaking them yet. First, we're getting you out of here. Then we're going to fake your execution so convincingly that the council won't think to look for a body. And then," he glanced back at her, "we're going to disappear before they realize I know." Lyra stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You can't be serious." "Do I look like I'm joking? You're the Alpha King. You can't just run away. The kingdom needs you. Your people—" "My people," Kael interrupted, his voice sharp, "have been prospering on your suffering. They don't even know you exist. And my council," the word came out like a curse, "has been using my authority to torture you for months while I was too busy playing at leadership to notice." He turned back to the wall, started working on the first chain's anchor point. "So forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly kingly right now. They'll kill you." Her voice was flat. "The council. If they even suspect you know, they'll find a way to remove you. You're useful now, but a king who can't be controlled is a liability." "Let them try." The first bolt came free with a screech of metal. "I've survived assassination attempts before." "Not from people you trust." That made him pause. She was right, of course. Battle was one thing. You expected enemies on a battlefield. But poison in your wine? A blade in the dark from someone who smiled at you during council meetings? That was different, harder to defend against. He started on the second bolt anyway. "Why?" Lyra's voice was quiet behind him. "Why are you doing this? You could just order a proper investigation. Put them on trial. You have the power. Evidence can be destroyed. Witnesses can be silenced. Kael grunted as the second bolt resisted. By the time I gather enough proof to move against the council openly, you'll be dead and buried in an unmarked grave. If I'm lucky, they'll come up with a story about how you died resisting arrest. If I'm not, they'll make it look like I ordered it myself. The bolt finally gave way. So we're not playing by their rules. We're getting you out, getting you somewhere safe, and then we're going to burn their whole operation to the ground. Somewhere safe, Lyra repeated slowly. Where exactly do you think is safe from the Alpha King's council? The frontier. The third bolt came free easier than the first two. 3 days hard ride north. It's technically pack territory, but barely. Wild enough that people don't ask questions. Old enough that there are still elders who remember magic the council would rather stay forgotten. He glanced at her. Including possibly how to safely purge 4 months of collected curses from a sin-eater without killing everyone in the blast radius. The silence that followed was long enough that Kael thought she might have passed out. Then, "You've already planned this." Her voice held something like wonder. "Before you even came down here, you suspected." He hadn't. Not really. But he'd felt something off for months now, a wrongness in the council's eagerness to keep certain matters from his attention, the way they'd redirected him whenever he asked about the dungeons, the convenient timing of every good thing that happened to the kingdom. He dismissed it as paranoia, grief over his father's death making him see shadows where there were none. Turned out his paranoia had been completely justified. "I suspected they were hiding something," Kael admitted, working on the fourth bolt. "I thought maybe embezzlement, maybe a political affair, not—" He gestured at the cell, at her. "This. And now? Now I'm improvising." The fourth bolt clattered to the floor. One left. Fair warning, I'm much better at strategy than improvisation. Despite everything, despite the pain she had to be in, despite 4 months of torture, despite the very real possibility that they were both about to die. Lyra laughed. It was a broken sound, more sob than humor, but it was genuine. "That's not reassuring, Your Majesty." "Call me Kael." The final bolt fought him, rusted into place by time and moisture. "If we're about to become fugitives together, we can skip the formalities." Fugitives. She tested the word. The Alpha King and his pet sin-eater, running for the hills. They'll write songs about how stupid we are. Let them. The bolt gave way with a final shriek of protesting metal. The chains holding her to the wall went slack, and Lyra stumbled forward. Kael caught her before she hit the ground, and the contact sent a shock through his system. Up close, without the chains and the darkness between them, he could feel it. The wrongness that clung to her wasn't just magical, it was physical, a weight that pressed down on her like she was carrying something too heavy for her frame. His wolf whined, confused and distressed by the scent of pack and not pack tangled together. "Can you hold on a little longer?" he asked quietly. "Just until we're clear of the castle?" Lyra's fingers curled into his shirt. They were cold. "I've held on for 4 months? What's a few more hours?" "That's the spirit." Kael guided her toward the door, moving slowly to match her stumbling pace. "Though, for the record, I'm hoping it's less than a few hours. My window for stealing horses and staging a convincing execution is fairly narrow." "You're insane." "Probably." He paused at the door, listening. No footsteps. Thorn had likely assumed Kael wanted privacy for the interrogation, was waiting upstairs for the order to prepare the execution. That gave them time. Not much, but enough. Maybe. Kael opened the door carefully, checking the corridor. Empty. The guard had returned to his post upstairs, and the torches threw just enough light to navigate by. He pulled Lyra through, keeping her close, and started back toward the stairs. They made it 3 steps before she collapsed. Not fell. Collapsed, like a puppet with cut strings. One moment she was walking, the next she was dead weight in his arms, her eyes rolling back to show the whites. The scent of rot intensified, became almost overwhelming, and for a horrible moment Kael thought he'd killed her just by breaking the chains. Then she gasped, a horrible rattling sound, and her eyes snapped back into focus. "Sorry," she whispered. "Sometimes the curses, they move. When I change position, it's like..." She grimaced. "Like having something alive inside you, trying to get out." Kael didn't ask what that felt like. He didn't want to know. Instead, he picked her up bodily. She weighed almost nothing, which was alarming in its own right. and continued toward the stairs. This isn't going to work, Lyra said against his shoulder. Even if we get out of the castle, even if we make it to the frontier, what then? You said it yourself. I'm carrying enough curses to kill everyone for a quarter mile. I'm a walking plague. The moment we stop running, people start dying. Then we find someone who can fix it. There is no fixing this. Sin Eaters don't get happy endings. We're not supposed to survive. Kale took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots echoing in the narrow space. At the top, he paused, listening again. Voices, far off. The changing of the guard, maybe, or servants preparing for the evening meal. Nothing close. Here's what I know, he said quietly, shifting her weight to free one hand. The council told me you were a traitor. They told me you deserved to be here, that you were dangerous, that keeping you locked up was the only way to protect the pack. They lied. He met her eyes. Which means everything else they've told me is suspect, including the part where Sin Eaters don't survive. That's not a lie, that's just, we'll see. Kael pushed through the door into the upper dungeon, the one where common criminals were kept. A few faces looked up at the sound, then quickly looked away when they recognized their king. Good. The fewer people who saw Lyra's face, the better. The guard station was ahead, and beyond that, the main corridor leading to the castle proper. This was the tricky part. Kael couldn't just walk out carrying a prisoner without raising questions. He needed a distraction, or a really good excuse, or both. He set Lyra down carefully, propping her against the wall. Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Where are you? Trust me. He didn't wait for an answer, just strode forward toward the guard station with all the confidence of someone who'd been giving orders his entire life. The guard on duty jumped to attention, his hand automatically going to his sword. Then recognition hit, and he relaxed, marginally. Your Majesty. We weren't expecting the prisoner in the lowest cell, Kael interrupted. Lyra Ashen. I want her prepared for execution. Tomorrow at dawn, public ceremony in the main square. The guard blinked. Sir, Counselor Thorne said, Counselor Thorne doesn't make those decisions. I do. Kael let authority ring in his voice. The woman is a traitor and a practitioner of dark magic. Her crimes are severe enough to warrant public execution. The people deserve to see justice done. Of course, Your Majesty. Should I inform the counselor that... I'll inform him myself. You just make sure the prisoner is prepared. Clean her up, for mercy's sake. I won't have the pack thinking we torture people before we execute them. The guard's face did something complicated. About that, sir? Yes? The prisoner, she's in rather bad shape. 4 months in the cells, and the counselor's methods were thorough. If we parade her through the square looking like that, people might ask questions. Exactly what Kael was counting on. Then make her presentable. You have healers on staff for a reason. The healers might not be enough, sir. The damage is pretty extensive. It might be kinder to just... The guard made a quick cutting gesture across his throat. No. The word came out harder than Kael intended, and he forced himself to moderate his tone. I want her conscious and aware when she faces the pack. I want her to understand exactly what she's done and why she's being punished. A quick death is too easy. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth, but the guard nodded approvingly. Understood, sir. We'll have her ready. Good. I want 4 guards on her at all times. No visitors without my explicit permission. Is that clear? Crystal, Your Majesty. Kael nodded and turned away, already planning his next move. The execution would be staged for dawn. Plenty of time to get Lyra out of the castle under cover of darkness. He'd need horses, supplies, a plausible explanation for leaving the castle himself. Sir? He stopped. Yes? What should we do about the cell? The marks on the walls, the binding chains, should we clear them out? Kael's mind raced. If they cleared the cell, they'd destroy evidence. But if they left it intact, someone might wonder why such elaborate precautions were necessary for a simple traitor. Leave it, he decided. Let it stand as a reminder of how dangerous dark magic can be. In fact, inspiration struck. I want the cell sealed. No one goes in or out. It's to be preserved exactly as it is. The guard looked uncertain. For how long, sir? Until I say otherwise. Kael met his eyes. Those are direct orders from your king. Do you have a problem with that? No, sir. No problem at all. Excellent. Kale turned away again, this time making it 3 steps before the voice came from behind him. You're making a mistake, Your Majesty. Counselor Thorne stepped out of the shadows at the end of the corridor, his face grave. How long had he been standing there? How much had he heard? Am I? Kale kept his voice level, bored even. Please enlighten me. A public execution is hasty. The prisoner still has information we could extract. There are others involved in her conspiracy, names she hasn't given us yet. If we kill her now, we lose that source. 4 months, Kyle said softly. You've had 4 months to extract information. If she hasn't talked by now, she's not going to. With respect, Your Majesty, these things take time. The Omega is stubborn, but we're close to breaking her completely. Just a few more weeks? No. Kyle let his alpha power leak into the word, just a touch, enough to remind Thorne who was in charge. I've made my decision. The execution proceeds as planned. Dawn tomorrow, public square, full ceremony. Thorne's jaw worked silently. Behind his eyes, Kyle could see calculations running, strategies being formed and discarded. Finally, as you wish, Your Majesty, though I still maintain this is a waste of a valuable resource. Resource. The word made Kyle want to put his fist through a wall. Instead, he smiled. Duly noted, Counselor. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make. He walked past Thorne, every muscle screaming at him to move faster, to run, to get Lyra and get out now before this all fell apart. But kings didn't run. Kings moved with purpose and authority and absolute confidence that they were doing the right thing, even when they were about to commit treason against their own council. Lyra was where he'd left her, somehow even paler than before. Her eyes tracked him as he approached, wide and glassy with pain. Change of plans, Kale said quietly, crouching beside her. Can you walk? Thought you said, stay put. That was before Thorne showed up. Come on. He helped her to her feet, keeping the motion casual, like he was simply escorting a prisoner. To anyone watching, it would look perfectly normal. We're going to walk out of here nice and slow. You're being transferred to a holding cell for tomorrow's execution. Guards will be watching, so try to look appropriately condemned. Not hard. They made it to the main corridor before Lyra's legs gave out again. This time Kyle was ready, catching her smoothly and slinging her arm over his shoulders like she was just tired, not dying from the inside out. Almost there, he murmured. Just a little further. The castle was beginning to stir with evening activity. Servants lighting lamps, guards changing shifts, nobles returning from their daily business. Every face that turned their way was another risk, another person who might report seeing the king carrying a prisoner through the halls. Kyle kept his expression neutral, nodded to the people who bowed as he passed, acted like this was completely normal. Inside, he was screaming. They reached his private chambers without incident, a small miracle. Kyle kicked the door shut behind them and finally let himself breathe. Okay, he said, lowering Lyra onto the nearest chair. New plan. You stay here. Don't move. Don't make noise. Don't even breathe too loud. I need to... This is your room. Lyra was looking around with glazed eyes, taking in the tapestries, the weapons on the walls, the massive bed that could sleep 4. You brought me to your private chambers. Safest place in the castle. No one comes in here without permission. He was already moving, pulling supplies from various hiding spots. Emergency travel pack, check. Weapons, check. Money. He grabbed a pouch of gold coins from his desk drawer, check. I'm going to arrange for horses and a distraction. When I get back, Kyle. Her voice stopped him. This is insane. You know that, right? That. He looked at her, really looked. She was shaking, her skin clammy with sweat, the borrowed cloak wrapped around her like armor. 4 months ago, she'd probably been normal, happy even. Now she was this broken thing, held together by spite and stubbornness, and he was her only chance. Insane is letting them turn you into a human sacrifice while I play king in my comfortable castle, Kale said quietly. This is just very, very stupid. Lyra's laugh was wet. There's a difference? Absolutely. Insane has no plan. Stupid knows it's a bad plan and does it anyway. He checked his knife, made sure it was secure. I'll be back in an hour, maybe 2. Stay quiet, stay hidden, and for the love of he caught himself, try not to die while I'm gone. No promises. Kale paused at the door, hand on the latch. There was something else he needed to say, something important, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, the truth about what they did to you, about what you are. When this is over, when you're safe, I want you to tell the whole story, every detail, every name. Why? Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember that you existed, that you mattered, that you weren't just a convenient sacrifice. He met her eyes. And because when I bring them down, I want to be able to tell everyone exactly why. Then he was gone, slipping out into the corridor and pulling the mask of the Alpha King back into place. He had work to do, people to deceive, a kingdom to temporarily abandon. Behind him, in the room that had never held anyone but him, Lyra Ashen sat in a chair that cost more than her life apparently had been worth and tried very hard not to cry. She failed. The hour Kael promised turned into 3. Lyra spent the first 30 minutes just trying to breathe without her ribs screaming. The chair he'd left her in was soft, obscenely soft compared to stone floors and iron chains, and her body didn't know what to do with comfort anymore. Every time she shifted, something inside her moved wrong, like broken glass grinding between her organs. The curses. 4 months of accumulated darkness, packed into a frame that was never meant to hold it. She could feel them churning, restless now that the binding chains were gone. They wanted out, wanted to spread, to infect, to return to the world that had created them in the first place. She pressed a hand to her stomach and felt something pulse beneath her skin. Not her heartbeat. Something else. The door opened so quietly she almost missed it. Kale slipped inside, his arms full of dark fabric. His hair was wet. He'd bathed, changed into traveling clothes that looked deliberately plain, nothing that screamed royalty. He looked like a soldier. Maybe a mercenary. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Just one?" Lyra's attempt at humor came out shaky. Thorns locked down the castle, no one in or out without council approval. Kale dumped the clothes on the bed, trousers, a tunic, a cloak even heavier than the one she was already wearing. He's calling it a security measure. Says there are rumors of rogue activity near the borders, and we can't be too careful. He knows. He suspects. Kale moved to the window, peering through the heavy curtains. There's a difference. If he knew for certain, we'd already be under guard. He's fishing, trying to see if I'll do something stupid. Like smuggling a prisoner out of your own castle? Exactly like that. He turned back to her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. The warrior, not the king. Which means we're moving up the timeline. We leave tonight. Now, actually. Lyra looked at the window, at the sheer drop beyond it. They were on the 4th floor. How? Service passages. There's a network of tunnels under the castle, old smuggling routes from before my grandfather's time. Most people don't know they exist. He grabbed the clothes from the bed and thrust them at her. Can you change on your own, or do you need help? She stared at the bundle in her hands. The fabric was rough, practical. Nothing like the rags she'd been wearing. I can manage. Good. Be quick. We have maybe 20 minutes before the guard rotation, and I need you mobile. He turned his back, giving her privacy she hadn't asked for. Lyra stood, slowly, carefully, and let his cloak fall to the floor. Her own clothes came off in pieces, some of the fabric literally stuck to wounds that had scabbed over. She didn't let herself look at her body. Didn't want to see what 4 months had done to it. The new clothes were too big, but not by much. She cinched the belt tight, pulled on the boots he'd included. Also too large, but wearable with extra wrapping. The cloak went on last, heavy and warm, and smelling like cedar. Done, she said. Kale turned, gave her a quick once-over, and nodded. You look like a stable boy. That'll work. He moved to the fireplace, running his hands along the stones until something clicked. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing darkness. Stay close. The passages are narrow and the footing's bad in places. If you fall, I can't guarantee I'll be able to catch you before you break something important. Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to get you out alive. He pulled out a small lamp, the kind that burned oil and didn't smoke, and lit it with a taper from the fireplace. After you. The passage was exactly as advertised, narrow, dark, and smelling of mold. The walls were so close that Lyra's shoulders brushed stone on both sides, and the ceiling was low enough that Kael had to duck. They moved in silence, the only sound their footsteps and Lyra's increasingly labored breathing. She'd thought she could do this. Thought 4 months of survival meant she was strong enough to walk a few hundred feet through a tunnel. She was wrong. The pain hit without warning, a spike of agony that drove through her chest and left her gasping. She caught herself against the wall, felt something inside her shift and writhe. The curses were getting worse, more active, like they knew freedom was close and were fighting for it. Lyra, Kael's voice, low and urgent. Talk to me, what's happening? The bindings, she managed. Breaking the chains, it destabilized everything. The curses are trying to... Another wave of pain cut her off. This one bad enough that her knees buckled. Kael caught her before she hit the ground, his arm around her waist, the only thing keeping her upright. How long can you hold them? I don't know. Hours maybe less. She forced herself to breathe through the pain. If they break loose before we're clear of the city, then we move faster. He shifted his grip, basically carrying her now. The tunnel opens up ahead. There's a drainage grate that leads to the river. From there, it's a quarter-mile to where I stashed the horses. Quarter-mile. Might as well be 100. But Lyra nodded anyway, because what else could she do? They stumbled forward through the dark. Time lost meaning. Could have been minutes or hours. Lyra focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on not screaming when the curses twisted inside her like living things trying to claw their way out. The tunnel did open up eventually. The ceiling rose, the walls widened, and fresh air hit her face like a benediction. She could see stars through the grate above, smell the river. Kael set her down carefully, then climbed up to work on the grate. It resisted, rusted shut probably, but he had leverage and determination. Metal screamed against metal, and then the grate was free, clattering aside. Up you go! He dropped back down, laced his fingers together to make a stirrup. I'll boost you. Lyra put her foot in his hands and let him lift her. The edge of the opening scraped her palms raw, but she pulled herself through and out into the night. The riverbank was rocky and steep, the water below black and fast-moving. On the far side, she could see lights. The city, still awake, still going about its business while she and the king fled like criminals. Kael emerged behind her, moving with the easy grace of someone who'd done this before. The horses are downstream. Can you walk? Do I have a choice? Not really. They followed the river, staying in the shadows, moving from rock to rock like ghosts. The city sounds faded behind them, replaced by the rush of water and the wind through the trees. Lyra's legs were shaking by the time they reached the small grove where Kael had hidden 2 horses, already saddled and loaded with supplies. You planned this. Lyra leaned against a tree, trying to catch her breath. Before you came to the dungeon, you had this ready. I planned for the possibility of needing to leave in a hurry, Kael corrected, checking the saddle straps. Wasn't sure why I'd need to until tonight. Paranoia pays off sometimes. That's not paranoia. That's... Another spike of pain, worse than before. Lyra doubled over, felt something hot and wrong pushing at her skin from the inside. Oh no. What? What's wrong? They're coming out. She could barely get the words past her clenched teeth. The curses. I can't hold them anymore. Kael was in front of her in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. Yes, you can. Just a little longer. We're almost clear of the city. You don't understand. Lyra looked up at him, and she knew her eyes must be doing something wrong because he flinched. When they come out, everything around me dies. Plants, animals, people. Everything within range just stops. I felt it happen twice before when they tried to move me between cells. The guards who touched me were dead within hours. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe. Kael's jaw set in that way she was starting to recognize. The look of someone who'd decided to do something stupid and wouldn't be talked out of it. Then we ride. Now, get on the horse. Didn't you hear me? If I lose control while we're riding, then I'll deal with it. He practically threw her onto the nearest horse, a massive gray mare that snorted at the sudden weight. Hold on to the saddle, don't fall off. That's your only job. He swung onto the second horse, a black gelding that looked like it could run through walls, and grabbed the mare's reins. Then they were moving, crashing through the underbrush and away from the river at a pace that should have been suicidal in the dark. Lyra clung to the saddle with both hands, felt the mare's powerful muscles bunching and releasing beneath her. The pain was constant now, a scream building in her throat. The curses were pushing at every boundary, looking for weak points, for any way out. She could feel them finding cracks. "Kale!" Her voice came out strangled. "It's happening!" "Not yet, it's not." He urged the horses faster, weaving between trees that appeared like dark sentinels in the night. "Fight it. You've held on for 4 months. You can hold on for 4 more minutes." 4 minutes. An eternity. The darkness inside her was boiling over now, spilling out through her pores like sweat. She could see it, actual shadow, thick and oily, dripping off her hands and onto the horse beneath her. Where it touched the mare's coat, the hair turned gray. Dead. The horse. Forget the horse. Focus on staying conscious. But she couldn't. The curses had found their exit, and they were flooding out in a wave of corrupted power that made the air itself feel heavy. Lyra felt the mare stumble, felt its heartbeat stutter beneath her. Then Kael was there, somehow having brought his horse alongside hers in the narrow space between trees. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his skin making contact with hers, with the darkness coating her skin. She waited for him to die. Instead, something else happened. The moment their skin touched, Lyra felt the curses pause, like they'd run into an unexpected wall. Kael's power, his alpha nature, was pushing back against the darkness, not absorbing it, but deflecting it, creating a barrier. "What?" she started. "Shut up and hold on to me," Kael gritted out. His face was twisted with effort, veins standing out on his neck. "I can't hold this for long." Lyra reached across the gap between horses and grabbed his hand. The contact was instant and overwhelming. His power flowed into her, meeting the curses head-on, not destroying them, just containing them. Building a new prison inside her made of alpha will instead of iron chains. It was working, barely. The darkness stopped spreading, pulled back slightly. Enough for her to breathe, enough for the horses to keep running. "How are you doing this?" Lyra gasped. "No idea." Kael's voice was strained. "Saw it in a vision once, old magic, bond magic. Thought it was just a story." He risked a glance at her. "Turns out alphas can share burdens with omegas if both parties consent. Creates a temporary link." "I didn't consent to anything. You grabbed my hand, didn't you? That's consent enough for emergency magic." The horses broke through the tree line into open grassland, and Kael finally let them slow to a canter. "How do you feel?" Lyra took inventory. The pain was still there, but muted. Manageable. The curses were still inside her, but they'd stopped trying to tear their way out. "Better. But what about you?" "I'll live." He didn't sound certain. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The city disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and darkness. Ahead, the land rose in gentle hills that would eventually become mountains. The frontier, wild territory where pack law was more suggestion than rule. Kael finally pulled the horses to a stop at the top of a ridge. Below them, the land stretched out in shadow and moonlight. Behind them, there was nothing but empty grassland. "We need to rest," he said, sliding off his horse with movements that looked painful. "The horses are done, and you look like death." "Feels accurate." Lyra tried to dismount and nearly fell. Her legs had stopped working properly sometime in the last hour. Kael caught her, again, and guided her to a flat rock. "Sit. I'll set up camp." Camp turned out to be a bedroll, a small fire, and some dried meat that Lyra couldn't even think about eating. She watched Kael work, noting the way he moved, efficiently, but with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine." "You're lying. The bond magic, it's affecting you, isn't it?" Kael didn't answer immediately. He finished with the fire, sat down across from her, and pulled off his gloves. His hands were shaking. "The curses. When I created the barrier, some of them leaked through. Not much. Just enough to—" He flexed his fingers. "Make things difficult." "How difficult?" "I can't feel my left arm below the elbow. My heart keeps skipping beats. And there's something wrong with my vision on the right side. Everything's got a gray edge to it." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reporting on the weather. Horror washed over Lyra in a cold wave. "I'm killing you," You're not. The curses are. There's a difference. A difference you're experiencing because of me. She tried to stand, felt the darkness inside her surge in response. You need to break the bond, now, before more of them get through. Can't. Kyle poked at the fire with a stick. Bond magic isn't like a door you can close. It's more like a bridge. Once built, it stays until the burden is resolved, or one of us dies. Then resolve it. Let me go. Let the curses out. And kill everything within a quarter mile? No. His voice was flat, final. We're 3 hours from the nearest village. I'm not condemning innocent people to death because this is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Kyle, you can't feel your arm. And you've been carrying death inside you for 4 months. He looked at her across the fire, and his eyes were hard. I think I can handle a few hours of discomfort. Lyra wanted to scream at him, wanted to shake him until he understood that she wasn't worth this, that no one person was worth poisoning yourself for. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, the part that had survived 4 months of torture through sheer spite, was grateful. Someone was finally sharing the weight. Someone finally believed her enough to risk dying for it. Why? The question came out smaller than she intended. Why are you doing this? I'm just an Omega, a nobody. You could have left me in that cell and your life would have been so much easier. Kale was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My father used to say that a king's worth is measured by who he protects, not who he rules. I thought I understood what that meant. Thought I was doing a good job. He laughed bitterly. Turns out, I was just blind. The council showed me what I wanted to see: prosperity, peace, success. And I ate it up because it made me feel like a good king. You didn't know. I should have. The words came out sharp. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why everything was suddenly going so well. Should have noticed when people started disappearing from the Omega quarters and no one talked about it. He met her eyes. You're not the first, are you? The first sin eater they used. Lyra's breath caught. She'd suspected, had heard whispers in those first days before the torture started in earnest. Other Omegas vanished over the years. Forgotten. No, I don't think so. How many? I don't know. 6? 8? The guards talked sometimes when they thought I was unconscious, said I was lasting longer than the others. The memory tasted like bile. They made bets on when I'd break. Kael's face went very still, and Lyra saw something dangerous move behind his eyes. The Alpha, rising. When he spoke again, his voice was soft in the way that preceded violence. Names. I want the names of every guard, every council member, every person who knew what was happening and did nothing. What are you going to do? Whatever it takes? He stood, started pacing. The council thinks they're untouchable. Think because they're nobility, because they've held power for generations, they can do whatever they want, use whoever they want. He stopped, looked at her. They're wrong, and I'm going to prove it. How? We're fugitives. The moment we left the castle, you became a traitor to your own council. They'll have put out warrants by now, spread stories about how you were seduced by dark magic, how I corrupted you. Let them. Kyle's smile was sharp. Stories can be fought with truth, and we have something they don't. What? You. Living proof of what they did. The council can spin whatever tale they want, but they can't explain away the marks on your skin, the curses in your blood, the binding symbols in that cell. He crouched in front of her. You're evidence, Lyra. Evidence that can't be dismissed or silenced. And once we get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can heal enough to tell your story. I'll never heal from this. She said it gently, but firmly. The curses aren't the kind of thing you recover from. Best case, I learn to live with them. Worst case, she gestured at his numb arm, I kill everyone who gets close. Then we find option 3. There is no option 3. There's always an option 3. Kyle settled back on his heels. The frontier isn't just lawless territory. It's old territory. The elders there remember magic from before the packs organized, before councils and hierarchies and all the structures we think are permanent. If anyone knows how to safely purge 4 months of accumulated curses from a sin eater without killing her or everyone around her, It's them. Lyra wanted to believe him, wanted to think there was a way out of this that didn't end with her dead or perpetually dying. But 4 months in a cell had taught her that hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. And if they can't help? Kael's expression softened slightly. Then we deal with that when we get there. But I'm not giving up on you before we've even tried. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Normal sounds. The kind of sounds you heard when the world wasn't ending. Lyra pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. I don't understand you. You barely know me. For all you know, everything the council said is true. Maybe I am a traitor. Maybe I did practice dark magic. Maybe I deserve exactly what I got. Do you really believe that? Does it matter what I believe? It's the only thing that matters. Kael fed another stick to the fire. The council could parade 1,000 witnesses saying you're guilty, and it wouldn't change what I saw in that cell, what I felt when I touched the binding chains. That wasn't justice. That was cruelty dressed up as necessity. But why does it matter to you? Lyra's voice cracked. Why does 1 Omega's suffering matter to the Alpha King? Because if it doesn't, then what's the point? Kael's voice was fierce. If I can sit on a throne built on torture and call it good leadership, if I can let my people suffer in secret so the rest can prosper, then I'm not a king. I'm just another tyrant in a long line of men who chose power over decency. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Lyra studied his face, the hard lines, the exhaustion, the genuine anger on her behalf. He meant it, every word. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a person instead of a problem. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? Okay, I'll try. The elders, option 3, all of it. I'll try. She managed a weak smile. But if this kills you, I'm going to be very annoyed. Kael's answering smile was startled but genuine. Noted. I'll do my best not to die then. They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning low between them. Lyra felt the bond magic thrumming beneath her skin, Kael's power wrapped around the curses like a cage. It wouldn't hold forever. She could already feel stress fractures forming, but it would hold long enough to get them to the frontier. Maybe. You should sleep, Kael said eventually. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. You're carrying half the curses now, which is why you need to sleep and I need to stay awake. If you have a nightmare and lose control, I need to be conscious to reinforce the bond. He settled against a rock, his sword within easy reach. Don't argue. You won't win. Lyra wanted to protest anyway, on principle, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight, and the bedroll looked impossibly inviting. She lay down, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and tried not to think about what morning would bring. Sleep took her faster than expected, dragging her down into darkness that was almost peaceful compared to waking. She dreamed of chains breaking and curses spreading like oil across clean water, dreamed of Kael's face as the darkness took him, his expression not angry but disappointed, like she'd failed him somehow. She woke to shouting. Lyra jerked upright, heart hammering, and saw Kael on his feet with his sword drawn. The fire had burned down to coals, and the sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. Standing at the edge of their camp were 4 figures on horseback, all wearing the silver and black of the royal guard. They'd been found. Step away from the Omega, Your Majesty. The lead rider's voice was familiar. Commander Drayson, one of the council's inner circle. We're here to bring you both back safely. No one needs to get hurt. Kael didn't lower his sword. Safely? Is that what you call what happened to her in that cell? Safe? The prisoner is a criminal and a traitor. She was being held according to pack law. Drayson's horse shifted nervously. Your Majesty has been deceived by dark magic. We understand. The Council is willing to overlook this lapse in judgment if you return with us now. Lapse in judgment. Kael's laugh was ugly. Is that what we're calling treason now? Your Majesty. No. The word cracked like a whip. You don't get to Your Majesty me after what you've done. The torture, the binding chains, the curses. I know everything, and I'm not going back. The guards exchanged glances. One of them, young, nervous, spoke up. Sir, if you don't return willingly, we have orders to... To what? Kael's voice went dangerously soft. To kill your king? That's treason. You'll hang for it. We have orders. Drayson repeated, and this time there was steel in his voice. From the council. Your Majesty is considered compromised. The Omega must be eliminated, and you must be secured for your own protection. Lyra felt the curses inside her respond to her fear, pushing against Kael's barriers. The bond magic held, but barely. If fighting started, if she lost control, Kael must have felt it too because his grip on the sword tightened. Last chance, Commander. Turn around. Forget you saw us. I'll forget this conversation ever happened. You know I can't do that, sir. Then we have a problem. The guards drew their weapons, 4 against 1, and Kael was already weakened from the bond magic. The math was simple and brutal. They were going to die here. Unless... Lyra stood up, felt every eye turn to her. Wait. Lyra, don't... Kael started. I'll go back. The words came out steady, stronger than she felt. I'll return to the cell, submit to whatever punishment the council wants. Just let him go. No. Kael moved to stand between her and the guards. Absolutely not. It's the only way. It's not happening. Kael, please. I said no. He looked back at her, and his eyes were blazing. I didn't break you out of that cell just to let you walk back into it. We're not doing this. Then what are we doing? Lyra felt panic rising in her throat. Because I don't see another option here. Option 3, Kael said. Then, to Drayson. You want her? Come take her. What happened next happened fast. Kael moved first, crossing the distance to the nearest guard in 2 strides. His sword came up, met the guard's blade with a screech of metal. The guard was good, trained, experienced, but Kael was an alpha, and fighting like a man with nothing left to lose. Lyra watched the second guard circle around, trying to flank Kael. Watched the third one spurring his horse toward her with a spear leveled at her chest. The curses inside her sensed danger and surged. The bond magic shattered. Darkness exploded out of Lyra in a wave of pure corrupted power. It hit the charging guard first, and Lyra saw his face go gray, saw his horse stumble and fall. The animal was screaming, a horrible dying sound, and the guard was trying to crawl away, but his legs weren't working anymore. The second guard took the brunt of it next. He managed to get his shield up, but the darkness went through wood and metal like they were paper. His scream cut off abruptly as the curses found his heart and stopped it. Lyra felt every death like a physical blow, felt the curses feeding on the lives they'd taken, growing stronger, more active. Lyra! Kael's voice, distant and panicked. Pull it back. She couldn't. The darkness was free now, spreading in every direction like wildfire. The grass beneath her feet turned black and crumbled to ash. The trees at the edge of the clearing withered. Even the air felt heavy, poisoned. Drayson was still alive, barely. His horse had bolted, and he was on foot, backing away with his sword raised. Monster, he gasped. You're a monster. Maybe she was. Maybe the council had been right all along. Then Kael was in front of her, his hands on her shoulders. Look at me. Lyra, look at me. She forced her eyes up to his face. He was pale, sweating, but his grip was firm, real. You are not a monster, he said fiercely. You're a person who's been hurt, who's carrying something too heavy, but you're not a monster. Do you hear me? I killed them. They would have killed us. You defended yourself. That's not murder. That's survival. He pulled her closer. Now pull it back. Pull the curses back inside. I know you can do it. I can't. Yes, you can. You've been doing it for 4 months. This is no different. His hands moved to her face, forcing her to maintain eye contact. Breathe with me. In. Out. Focus on my voice. Focus on me. Lyra tried to find the edges of the darkness and pull it back in. But it was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. The curses didn't want to be contained anymore. They'd tasted freedom, tasted death, and they wanted more. It's not working, she sobbed. Kael, I can't. Then let me help. And before she could ask what he meant, Kael grabbed her hand and bit down hard on his own wrist. Blood welled up, bright and red. He pressed the wound against her palm, and Lyra felt his power flood into her. Not the careful barrier from before, but everything. His full strength, his alpha nature, his life force, all of it pouring through the blood connection directly into her. The curses recoiled from it like they'd been burned. Kael gritted his teeth, his face twisted with pain. Now, Pull them in now while they're weak. Lyra gathered every shred of will she had left and pulled. The darkness resisted, fought, tried to slip away. But Kael's power was stronger, and together they dragged the curses back inside her, cramming them into the space they'd escaped from. It took forever. It took seconds. When it was finally done, Lyra collapsed against Kael's chest, and he went down with her, both of them hitting the ground in a tangle of limbs. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Kael groaned. That was incredibly stupid. Which part? Lyra's voice was muffled against his shirt. All of it. He shifted, trying to sit up and failing. We're not doing that again. Agreed. They lay there in the ash-covered clearing, surrounded by the bodies of the guards and the ruins of their camp. The sun was starting to rise properly now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscene given what had just happened. We need to move, Kael said eventually. More guards will come when these don't report back. I know. Neither of them moved. Finally, Lyra forced herself to roll away, to stand on shaking legs. Kael followed suit, slower and more careful. His wrist was still bleeding, she'd forgotten about that, and his face had gone the color of old parchment. You need a healer, she said. We don't have a healer. Then bandages, something. Kael tore a strip off his shirt and wrapped his wrist roughly. Good enough. Come on, the horses survived somehow, we need to… He stopped, stared past her shoulder with an expression she couldn't read. Lyra turned. Drayson was still alive. Barely. He was on his knees, one hand pressed to his chest where the curses had touched him. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow. He had maybe minutes left, but his eyes were clear, focused, and he was looking at Kael with something like regret. Your Majesty, he rasped. I'm sorry. I didn't know what they were doing to her. Not all of it. They said she was dangerous, that the bindings were necessary. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I should have questioned it, should have looked closer. Kael crouched beside him. Why didn't you? Because I wanted to believe. Drayson's laugh turned into another cough. The kingdom was thriving. Everyone was happy. Why question success? His eyes found Lyra. I'm sorry, girl, for what they did. For what I let happen. Lyra didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there was anything to say. Drayson's breathing rattled. There are more. Other councils in other territories. They're all doing it. Using Omegas as filters for their darkness. It's not just here. His hand reached out, grabbed Kael's sleeve. You have to stop them. Promise me. Promise you'll… The words cut off. His hand went slack. The light in his eyes faded like a candle in the wind. Kael closed the dead man's eyes gently, then stood. When he looked at Lyra, his expression was carved from stone. We're going to the frontier, we're finding the elders, and then… His voice dropped into something cold and furious. We're coming back, and we're burning it all down. Lyra looked at the bodies, at the ash, at the blood on Kael's wrist, and the gray tinge to his skin. Looked at the man who'd thrown away a kingdom for her and was now promising to destroy an entire system of corruption. Okay, she said. They mounted the horses, the animals were spooked but alive, and rode north as the sun climbed higher. Behind them, the clearing full of dead guards slowly disappeared into the distance. Neither of them looked back. Neither of them looked back. The frontier announced itself gradually, first through the thinning of the roads, then the wildness of the vegetation, and finally through the silence. No villages, no farms, just endless forest that grew darker and older with every mile. The trees so thick overhead that riding felt like moving through a tunnel. Kael's condition worsened by the hour. The numbness in his arm had spread to his shoulder. His heart wasn't just skipping beats anymore. It was stuttering, stopping for seconds at a time before lurching back to life. Twice he'd nearly fallen from his horse, catching himself only through sheer stubbornness. Lyra watched him struggle and felt guilt eating her alive. We need to stop, she said for the third time that afternoon. We're close. Kael's voice was rough, slurred at the edges. The elder settlement is just past the next ridge. I can feel it. You can't feel anything. You can barely stay conscious. Then it's a good thing the horse knows where to go. They crested the ridge as the sun began its descent, and Lyra saw what Kael had been aiming for. Below them, nestled in a valley between two arms of the forest, was a settlement that looked like it had grown rather than been built. The structures were woven into the landscape, homes built around living trees, bridges made from trained branches, gardens that blurred the line between cultivated and wild, and everywhere the smell of magic, old magic, the kind that made her skin prickle and the curses inside her stir uneasily. There, Cale managed, pointing with his good hand toward the largest structure, a building that seemed to be half tree, half stone, pulsing with a faint blue light. The Elder's Hall. That's where... He slid off his horse mid-sentence. Lyra was moving before his body hit the ground, but she wasn't fast enough. Cale landed hard on his side, didn't try to catch himself. His eyes were open but unfocused, his breathing shallow and wrong. No, no, no! Lyra knelt beside him, pressed her hand to his chest. His heartbeat was barely there, a thread-thin flutter that kept disappearing. Cale, stay with me. We're here. We made it. You just have to... Help! The word tore out of her throat. Someone help us! For a long moment, nothing. The settlement below remained still, undisturbed. Then figures began emerging from the buildings, slowly, cautiously, like animals checking if the predator had really left. An old woman reached them first. She moved with the steady gait of someone who'd walked these hills for decades. Her face so weathered it was hard to tell where the wrinkles ended and the scars began. Her eyes, pale blue, almost white, swept over Cale's prone form, then locked onto Lyra. Sin Eater, she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Lyra nodded. Please, he needs help. He's been carrying half the curses, and it's killing him. I can see what he's been carrying. The old woman crouched beside Cale, placed a gnarled hand on his forehead. Fool boy, bond magic with a Sin Eater? That's not courage, that's suicide. She looked up at Lyra. How long? Since last night. Maybe longer, I don't know anymore. And the curses? How much have you got packed in there? 4 months' worth. From the entire capital. The old woman whistled low. That's ambitious. Most Sin Eaters don't last 4 weeks. She stood, gestured to 2 younger people who'd been hovering nearby. Get him inside, carefully. If that bond breaks while he's unconscious, the backlash will stop his heart for good. They moved quickly, efficiently, lifting Cale onto a stretcher woven from vines. Lyra tried to follow, but the old woman's hand shot out, surprisingly strong, gripping her wrist. Not yet. You and I need to talk first. He's dying because of me. And rushing in there while you're leaking curse energy like a broken dam won't help him. The woman's grip tightened. You want to save him? Then listen. My name is Elder Mira. I've been dealing with Sin Eaters for 60 years, and right now you're the worst case I've ever seen. Lyra felt the words like a slap. I didn't ask for this. They never do. Mira released her wrist, started walking toward the Elder's Hall. Come. We have work to do, and not much time to do it. The inside of the hall was unlike anything Lyra had seen. The walls weren't walls. They were living wood, growing in patterns that formed rooms and corridors. Bioluminescent fungi provided light, casting everything in shades of blue and green. The air itself felt different here, charged with possibility. Mira led her to a circular room at the heart of the building. In the center was a pool of water so clear it looked like glass, surrounded by symbols carved into the living wood floor. Purification circle, Mira explained. Old magic, pre-pack. Your council wouldn't know it if it bit them. She began lighting candles around the circle's edge. Here's the situation, girl. You're carrying enough concentrated darkness to poison a small city. The bond your king created is the only thing keeping it contained, but it's eating him alive from the inside. You've got maybe 12 hours before his body gives out completely. Then we break the bond, and everyone in this settlement dies when the curses flood out unchecked. Try again. Lyra's mind raced. The purification circle. Can it handle the curses? If we release them slowly, in a controlled way, maybe. But that would take days, weeks even. Your king doesn't have weeks. Then what do we do? Mira studied her for a long moment. We gamble. We release everything at once, channel it into the circle, and hope the purification magic can transform it before it spreads. It's dangerous. Could kill you, could kill me, could definitely kill everyone in shouting distance if it goes wrong. And if it goes right, If it goes right, the curses get transformed from poison into raw energy. Harmless. Maybe even useful. Mira's expression was grim. But I've only ever seen it done once, and that Sin Eater was carrying maybe a week's worth of darkness. You're carrying 16 times that. Lyra looked at the pool, at the symbols, at the candles that seemed to burn with a light that didn't flicker. What are my odds? Of surviving? Maybe 30%? Of succeeding? Lower. And if we don't try, Kael dies within 12 hours. You die shortly after when the bond collapse triggers a curse explosion, and this settlement becomes a dead zone for the next century. The math was brutal and simple. They could all die trying, or they could all die doing nothing. At least trying gave them a chance. What do I need to do? Mira's smile was sharp with approval. Get in the pool. The water was colder than Lyra expected. It reached her waist when she stepped into the center, and the moment it touched her skin, she felt the curses react. They hated the water, recoiled from it like it was burning them. That's the purification at work, Mira called from the edge. It's going to get worse, much worse. When we start the ritual, every curse inside you is going to try to escape at once. You need to hold them just long enough for the circle to catch them. Can you do that? Lyra thought about Kael, unconscious somewhere in this building, his heart fighting to keep beating. Thought about the settlement full of people who'd done nothing wrong except offer shelter to strangers. Thought about Drayson's last words. There are more. Other councils doing the same thing. I can do it. Then we begin. Mira stepped into the circle, not into the water, but onto the carved symbols at its edge. She began to chant in a language Lyra didn't recognize, and the symbols started to glow. The pain started immediately. It felt like the curses were trying to claw their way out through her skin. Lyra gasped, nearly fell, caught herself with a hand on the pool's edge. The water around her was starting to darken, turning gray with the corruption leaking out. Hold them! Mira's voice cut through the agony. Don't let them escape yet! But the curses didn't care what Lyra wanted. They'd been prisoners for 4 months, and now they sensed freedom. They pushed harder, finding every weak point, every crack in her resolve. Blood began to seep from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes. Almost there! Mira's chanting intensified, and the glow from the symbols brightened. On my mark, you let go. You release everything at once. The circle will catch it. You have to trust me. Trust. Lyra barely knew this woman, had no reason to believe this would work, but Kael had trusted her, had believed her when no one else did, had literally poisoned himself to keep her alive. She could do this. For him, she could do this. Now! Mira shouted. Let go now! Lyra stopped fighting. The curses exploded out of her in a torrent of darkness that turned the water black. She felt them leaving, every piece of corruption, every stolen sickness, every death that had been fed into her over 4 months, all of it flooding out at once. The circle caught it, barely. The symbols flared so bright Lyra had to close her eyes, and she heard Mira shouting in that ancient language, her voice strained with effort. Then something changed. The darkness in the water started to shift, transform. The black became gray, then silver, then clear again. The pain that had been tearing Lyra apart began to ease, replaced by something else, something that felt almost like power. Not the corrupted, poisonous power of the curses. Something cleaner, pure. Like the curses were being distilled down to their essence, the poison burned away to leave only energy behind. Lyra opened her eyes and saw the water around her glowing. Actually glowing, bright enough to light up the entire room. The light was coming from her, she realized, from her skin, her hair, even her breath. What's happening? Her voice sounded strange, stronger. Mira was staring at her with an expression caught between awe and terror. You're not just releasing the curses, you're absorbing the transformation, taking the purified energy into yourself. Is that bad? I don't know. Never happened before. The glow intensified. Lyra felt something building inside her chest, expanding outward. It didn't hurt, not exactly, but it was overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup. Mira, I can't. There's too much. Let it out. Channel it into something, anything, before it tears you apart. But Lyra didn't know how. Didn't know what to do with this much raw energy coursing through her veins. She raised her hands, trying to, what? Push it away? Contain it? Light exploded from her palms. Not darkness this time. Pure white light that shot upward, punched through the roof of the Elder's Hall, and kept going into the sky above. Lyra felt the energy draining out of her in a rush, felt it spreading across the settlement like a wave. She expected screaming, expected destruction. Instead, she heard gasping, wondering. Through the hole her power had blown in the roof, Lyra could see the light spreading across the valley in ripples. And everywhere it touched, things changed. Withered plants bloomed. Sick animals stood up, healed. A child who'd been born with a twisted leg watched in amazement as the bones straightened, the pain vanishing. An old man's clouded eyes cleared, sight returning after years of blindness. The curses, 4 months of accumulated poison and sickness and death, had been transformed into healing. Lyra stood in the center of the pool, watching her hands shake as the last of the light faded. The water around her was crystal clear now, not a trace of darkness remaining. She felt empty, hollow, like she'd been carrying so much weight for so long that now, without it, she might just float away. Well, Mira said into the silence, that's new. Lyra's legs gave out. She went down hard, face first into the water. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her was Mira shouting for help. She woke up in a bed that was too soft, under blankets that were too warm, with sunlight streaming through a window that shouldn't exist. For a moment, Lyra thought she'd dreamed everything. The dungeon, the torture, Kael, all of it. She was back in her old life, waking up in her small room in the Omega quarters. Then she tried to move and pain lanced through every muscle. Not curse pain, just the normal agony of a body that had been pushed far beyond its limits. Easy, a familiar voice. You've been out for 2 days. Your body's still recovering. Lyra turned her head, carefully, and saw Kael sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked terrible. Thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a pallor to his skin that spoke of recent illness. But he was alive, conscious, and the gray tinge to his complexion was gone. You're okay, she managed. So are you, apparently. Kael leaned forward and she saw his hand, the one that had been numb, flexing normally. Mira says what you did was impossible. Says sin eaters don't transform curses, they just carry them. But you didn't just carry them, you turned them into something else entirely. I didn't mean to. I know. Doesn't make it less remarkable. He paused. The settlement is calling you a miracle. 37 people were healed by your light. Everything from old wounds to chronic sickness to genetic defects. There's a woman who hasn't been able to have children for 15 years. She's pregnant now. The healers confirmed it this morning. Lyra tried to process that. Failed. That's not possible. And yet, Kael's expression was complicated. Lyra, do you understand what this means? You're not just a sin eater anymore. You're something else. Something the council definitely didn't plan for. Before she could respond, the door opened and Mira walked in carrying a tray with food that smelled better than anything Lyra had encountered in months. You're awake. Good. Mira set the tray down on a side table. We need to talk. All of us. About what? Lyra asked. About the fact that your little light show was visible for 20 miles in every direction, which means every scout, every patrol, every council spy in the region now knows exactly where you are. Mira's expression was grim. They'll be coming, soon, and when they get here, they're going to want answers about why their carefully controlled sin eater suddenly became a walking miracle worker. Kael stood, his hand moving to the sword that leaned against his chair. How long do we have? Day. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. Mira looked at Lyra. Which means we need to decide right now what we're going to do when they arrive. We fight, Kael said immediately. With what army? You're 1 Alpha, barely recovered. She's... Mira gestured at Lyra. Powerful, yes, but untrained. She doesn't even understand what she can do yet. And I'm an old woman with a settlement of civilians to protect. Then we run again. To where? Mira's voice was sharp. You think the council's going to stop hunting you because you cross another border? They've got resources, connections, power. They'll find you. And next time they won't send 4 guards. They'll send an army. Silence fell over the room. Lyra could feel the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them. Run and keep running until they were caught, fight and probably die. Surrender and definitely die. Unless, what if we don't run or fight? Lyra said slowly. What if we do something else? Both of them looked at her. Such as? Kale asked. Lyra sat up, ignoring the protests from her body. Drayson said there are other councils doing the same thing, using Omegas as sin eaters. What if we found them? What if we freed them? Mira's eyebrows rose. That's ambitious. That's suicide, Kael corrected. Lyra, we barely escaped from one council. You want to go up against multiple councils? Across multiple territories? I want to stop them from doing to others what they did to me. Lyra met his eyes. You said yourself, I'm not just a sin eater anymore. I can transform curses, turn poison into healing. What if that's the answer? What if instead of trying to hide or fight, we expose what they're doing, show the Pax what the councils have been keeping secret? They'll deny everything, Mira said. Your word against theirs. My word and the physical evidence. Lyra held up her hands. The scars from the chains were still there, but they'd changed. Instead of angry red wounds, they'd healed into silver marks that seemed to glow faintly in the sunlight. I'm living proof of what they did. And if we can find the other sin eaters, free them, let them tell their stories. The councils will kill us before we get that far, Kael interrupted. But his eyes were calculating now, strategic. Unless we move fast, hit multiple territories at once before they can coordinate a response. You're both insane, Mira muttered, but she was smiling slightly, though I suppose insanity is better than surrender. She looked at Lyra. You realize what you're proposing, yes? You want to start a revolution, tear down the entire council system. I want to stop them from torturing people. Lyra's voice was firm. If that means revolution, then fine. Revolution. Kael laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. A king and an Omega against the most powerful political structure in the territories. They're going to write ballads about how stupid we are. Or about how we won, Lyra countered. Winning would require a plan. Do we have one of those? I might, Mira said slowly. There's a gathering, happens once a year, brings together representatives from all the major territories. Councils, alphas, elder delegates. It's neutral ground. No violence allowed. Heavy magical enforcement. When? Kael asked. 3 weeks. In the Eastern Mountains. That's perfect, Lyra said. We can... It's impossible, Mira corrected. You'd never get past the security. And even if you did, standing up in front of every council in the region to accuse them of systematic torture, they'd have you arrested before you finished your first sentence. Unless I'm not the one making the accusation. Kael's expression had gone cold and focused. The king, not the fugitive. I'm still technically the Alpha King. I have the right to address the gathering, diplomatic immunity, at least until someone formally charges me with treason. Which they will the moment you start talking about sin eaters, Mira pointed out. Then I'll need proof they can't dismiss, witnesses they can't silence. Kael looked at Lyra. How many other territories did Drayson say were doing this? He didn't give a number, just said it wasn't just us. Then we find out. We have 3 weeks to locate the other sin eaters, free them if we can, and get them to the gathering. Kael started pacing, energy returning to his movements. It's a terrible plan with a dozen ways it could fail. But, Lyra prompted, but it's the only plan we've got. Mira shook her head. You understand that even if you pull this off, even if you expose the councils and free the sin eaters and survive the experience, you'll make enemies of some of the most powerful people in the world. Good. Kael's smile was sharp and dangerous. I'm tired of being friendly with people who torture innocents for profit. Over the next 2 days, they planned. Mira provided maps, intelligence, contacts scattered across the territories. Kyle used his knowledge of council politics to identify which territories were most likely to be using sin eaters. Lyra tried to understand what she'd become. Mira worked with her, testing the limits of her new abilities. Turned out that Lyra could still sense curses and corruption, but now, instead of just absorbing them, she could transform them. It took concentration, effort, and left her exhausted. But it worked. You're like a filter, Mira explained during one session, but instead of just collecting the poison, you're changing its fundamental nature. Transmutation magic. Very old, very rare. Can I use it on myself? Lyra asked. If I encounter another sin eater, can I take their curses and transform them? Theoretically, yes, but it would be dangerous. You just barely survive transforming your own curses. Taking on someone else's, especially if they've been collecting for months. Mira shook her head. It could kill you. But it's possible? Why do I get the feeling you're going to try it regardless of what I say? Lyra didn't answer. On the third day, scouts reported movement on the southern road. A large force, 50 soldiers, maybe more, flying council colors. They're here, Kael said, standing at the settlement's edge and watching the dust cloud approach. Earlier than Mira predicted. They probably pushed their horses to death getting here. Lyra stood beside him, trying not to show how terrified she was. 50 soldiers. They had maybe 20 fighters in the settlement, most of them civilians with minimal combat training. We can't win this fight, Kael said quietly. Not head on. I know. So we're back to running. No. Lyra turned to face him. We're back to option 3. Before Kael could ask what she meant, Lyra walked forward, out of the settlement, toward the approaching army. Lyra, what are you doing? Kael's voice was sharp with panic. Ending this, one way or another. She didn't look back. Trust me. She heard him curse, heard him running after her, but she'd gotten enough of a head start that she reached the army first. The soldiers pulled up short when they saw her. A woman walked forward from their ranks, tall, imposing, wearing the robes of a high counselor. Lyra recognized her from Kael's descriptions. Mistress Vex, the council's enforcer. Lyra Ashen, Vex said. Her voice was smooth, cultured. The traitor who seduced our king. We've been looking for you. I didn't seduce anyone. Your council tortured me for 4 months. A necessary evil. You were a threat. I was an Omega minding her own business until you kidnapped me and turned me into a sin eater. Lyra felt the power stirring inside her, responding to her anger. But that backfired, didn't it? Because I didn't die. I transformed. Vex's expression flickered. You're an abomination, a mistake that needs to be corrected. Then correct it. Lyra spread her arms. I'm right here, unarmed, alone. Take your best shot. Lyra, don't. Kael had caught up, was reaching for her. Stay back, she said without looking at him. To Vex. Well, aren't you going to kill the dangerous Omega? Vex smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Kill you? Why would I do that when you're so much more valuable alive? She gestured, and a dozen soldiers moved forward with chains. Not regular chains, these glowed with binding runes, same as the ones from the dungeon. They reached for Lyra. She let them. What are you doing? Kael's voice was strangled. Fight back. Can't fight back if I want them to take me where I need to go. Lyra met his eyes as the chains closed around her wrists. Trust me, please. Understanding dawned on his face, followed immediately by horror. No, Lyra, no! It's the only way to find the others, the other sin eaters. She spoke quickly, before the soldiers could drag her away. They'll take me back to their facility. I can free them from the inside. They'll kill you! Maybe. Or maybe I'll do to them what I did to the curses. Transform them, show them what happens when you try to make a weapon out of a person. The chains pulled tight, and Lyra stumbled. 3 weeks. The gathering. I'll see you there. And if I don't? Kael's voice broke. If you don't make it? Lyra smiled. It felt fragile. Then burn them all down anyway. For me. The soldiers pulled her away. Lyra watched Kael's face, the fury, the helplessness, the desperate calculation as he tried to figure out how to save her. Let her go, Vex called to him. She's made her choice. Be grateful we're showing mercy by not executing you on the spot. This isn't over, Kael said. His voice was low, dangerous. The Alpha speaking. Whatever you do to her, wherever you take her, I will find you. I will end you. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Vex's laugh was like breaking ice. You can try, fallen king, but you're alone now. No army, no kingdom, no power, just a failed ruler and his misplaced loyalty. She turned away. Take her. And if she tries anything, break her legs. She doesn't need to walk where she's going. They threw Lyra onto a horse, chained her to the saddle. As the army wheeled around and began the march back south, She caught one last glimpse of Kael standing at the settlement's edge. He wasn't alone, she realized. Mira was beside him, and behind them the people of the settlement were gathering, not running, not hiding, preparing. Lyra smiled. Maybe this plan wasn't as stupid as it seemed. The army rode for 3 days. They didn't speak to her, didn't explain where they were going, just rode in grim silence, stopping only when absolutely necessary. On the 4th day, they reached a compound that made Lyra's blood run cold. It was huge, far bigger than the dungeons under Kael's castle. And it wasn't hidden. It sat in plain sight, surrounded by high walls, with guards patrolling openly. A prison designed to hold people everyone had agreed to forget. They took her inside, down corridors that smelled of suffering, past cells filled with hollow-eyed Omegas who didn't even look up when she passed. How many? 10? 20? More? Vex led the way personally, stopping at a cell at the end of the longest corridor. Your new home. I trust you'll find it familiar. The cell was identical to the one Kael had found her in. Binding symbols on the walls, chains waiting, the same sense of wrongness in the air. But there was one difference. This cell had a window, small, barred, but there. Through it, Lyra could see the sky. She could see freedom. The guards threw her inside and began securing the chains. Lyra didn't resist, just waited, watching Vex through the bars. You made a mistake, Lyra said quietly. Did I? Vex's smile was indulgent. And what mistake would that be? You assume I came here to be a prisoner. Lyra felt the power stirring inside her, the transformed curse energy that Mira had helped her understand. I came here to be a catalyst. Meaning I'm going to free every sin eater in this building. I'm going to transform every curse you've forced them to carry. And then I'm going to show the world exactly what you've been doing here. Lyra met Vex's eyes. You wanted a weapon? Congratulations, you just gave me an arsenal. Vex's smile faltered, just for a moment. Then it was back, harder than before. We'll see about that. Guards, double the chains. Triple the binding runes. I want her unable to so much as think about using power. They worked quickly, wrapping her in so much iron and magic that Lyra could barely breathe. When they were done, she could feel the bindings pressing down on her, crushing the power back inside. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd left her conscious, aware. And that meant she could still reach the other Sin Eaters. As the guards filed out and Vex turned to leave, Lyra closed her eyes and let her awareness spread. It was like the bond magic Kael had used, but different, gentler. Instead of forcing a connection, she was offering one. I'm here, she thought, sending the words out into the darkness. I'm here, and I'm going to help you, all of you. Just hold on a little longer. She felt them respond, faint, weak, but there. 23 voices in the dark. 23 people who'd been suffering in silence while the world forgot them. Not anymore. Lyra opened her eyes and smiled at Vex through the bars. 3 weeks. That's all I need. 3 weeks, and your whole world comes down. Vex stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed, genuinely laughed, and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Alone in the cell, wrapped in chains and darkness, Lyra began to work. She'd transformed 4 months of curses in a single moment. What was 23 Sin Eaters compared to that? The power inside her pulsed, eager, hungry, and Lyra let it grow. The first connection came on the second night. She'd been lying still, conserving energy, letting the guards think the chains had broken her like they'd broken so many others. But inside, she was reaching out carefully, methodically, feeling for the threads of consciousness scattered throughout the compound. The girl in the cell 3 doors down responded first. Her name was Sarah, and she'd been here for 6 months, longer than Lyra had survived in Kael's dungeon. How? Sarah's mental voice was threadbare, shocked that anyone could hear her. How are you doing this? I learned something, Lyra sent back, about what we are, what they made us into. We're not just carriers, we're transformers. We can change what we hold. That's impossible. So is talking to you right now, but here we are. A pause, then, what do you want? To get us out. All of us. But I need time, and I need you to trust me. Trust a stranger? Trust another Sin Eater. We're all we've got. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Lyra thought she'd lost her. Then, what do I need to do? Stay alive, stay conscious, and when the moment comes, be ready to let go. By the 5th day, Lyra had reached 12 of them. By the 7th, 19. The last 4 were too far gone, barely conscious, their minds shattered by months or years of torture. Lyra tried reaching them anyway, sending warmth and presence into the darkness, hoping some part of them could still feel it. 2 of them responded, faintly, but it was enough. 21 sin eaters, 21 people carrying enough accumulated darkness to level a city. And Lyra was going to set them all free at once. The plan was insane. She knew that. Mira would have called it suicide. Kyle would have tried to talk her out of it. But they weren't here. And Lyra was done waiting for rescue. On the 10th day, Vex came to visit. She swept into the cell block like she owned it, which, technically, she did, flanked by 2 guards who looked uncomfortable being this close to so many sin eaters at once. "I'm told you've been quiet," Vex said, stopping in front of Lyra's cell. "No escape attempts, no dramatic speeches. I'm almost disappointed." Lyra looked up from where she sat against the wall. The chains had rubbed her wrists raw again, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. She looked exactly like what they wanted. Broken. "What's the point?" Her voice came out hoarse. "You've got me. You win." "How pragmatic." Vex tilted her head. "Though I notice you haven't asked why we brought you here instead of killing you." "I assume you have a reason." "We do. You see, your little transformation trick, turning curses into healing, that's valuable. Unprecedented, actually. The Council has decided that instead of executing you, we're going to study you." Vex's smile was cold. "Figure out how you did it, and then replicate it in a more controlled subject." Lyra's blood went cold. "You want to make more of me. We want to perfect what you stumbled into by accident. Imagine it. Sin eaters who don't just collect curses, but transform them on command. We could cure diseases, extend lifespans, eliminate weakness from our bloodlines entirely." Vex leaned closer. "You could have been part of something magnificent. Instead, you chose rebellion." "I chose freedom. There's a difference. Freedom is overrated, especially for Omegas." Vex straightened. "The procedure starts tomorrow. I'd tell you it won't hurt, but we both know that would be a lie. Try to get some rest." She left, and the cell block fell back into silence. Lyra waited until the guard's footsteps faded completely. Then she reached out to the others. "Change of plans. We're moving tonight." "Tonight?" Sarah's mental voice was panicked. "We're not ready. We don't have a choice. Tomorrow they start cutting me open to figure out how I work. I need everyone ready. When I give the signal, I want you all to do exactly what I do. Let go of everything you're carrying, all at once." "That'll kill us," someone else protested. Lyra thought it was Marcus, a man from the Northern Territories who'd been here for 8 months. "It'll kill us if we do it wrong. But if we do it together, if we channel it through me the way I channel it through the purification magic." Lyra paused, making sure they all felt her certainty. "We can transform it, all of it, turn it into something they can't control. And if you're wrong, then we die free instead of dying in these cells. I don't know about you, but I'll take that trade." The connections hummed with fear, with hope, with desperate calculation. These were people who'd been convinced they were powerless. Lyra was asking them to believe they could topple an empire. Finally, Sarah responded, "I'm in. Tell me what to do." One by one, the others agreed. Even the 2 who were barely conscious managed a flicker of assent. 21 sin eaters. One chance. Either they pulled this off or they all died trying. Lyra could live with those odds. Midnight came slowly. The compound settled into the quiet of night shift. Fewer guards, longer patrols. The assumption that prisoners too weak to stand weren't going to cause problems. They were about to learn how wrong that assumption was. Lyra closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, past the pain and the exhaustion and the fear, down to where the transform power lived. It was different from the curses she'd carried before. Cleaner, brighter, but just as dangerous if she lost control. "Everyone ready?" she sent out. 20 affirmatives came back. On 3. 1, 2. Lyra didn't say 3. She just let go. 21 sin eaters released 4 years of accumulated curses in the same instant. The explosion of darkness was immediate and catastrophic. It poured out of them like a dam breaking, flooding the corridor with corruption so thick the air turned black. Lyra heard guards shouting, heard alarms starting to sound, but she was already working. She grabbed hold of the darkness, not with her hands, but with her will, with the power she'd learned to use in Mira's purification circle. She pulled it toward herself, let it flow through her like water through a filter, and she transformed it. The process was agony. Each curse felt like swallowing broken glass. But Lyra had done this before, knew what it felt like, knew she could survive it. What she hadn't counted on was the sheer volume. This wasn't 4 months from one person. This was years from 21 people, each carrying darkness that should have killed them a dozen times over. It was too much. She couldn't. "Let me help," Sarah's voice, strained but determined. Lyra felt the girl's power joining hers, adding strength to the transformation. "Me too. Marcus this time. And me. Here. We're with you." One by one, the other Sin Eaters stopped just releasing their curses. They started helping transform them. It was crude, instinctive, nothing like what Lyra had learned from Mira. But it worked. Together, they turned poison into power. The darkness in the corridor began to change. Black became gray. Gray became silver. Silver became light. Pure, clean light that spread through the compound like wildfire. Lyra felt the binding chains on her wrists crack, then shatter. The runes on the walls flared once and went dark, overwhelmed by the transformation happening right in front of them. She stood up for the first time in 10 days and walked out of her cell. The corridor was chaos. Guards were stumbling around, temporarily blinded by the light. Some were on the ground, the transformed energy hitting them like a physical force. Others were running, trying to reach the exit before whatever was happening could catch them. Lyra walked past them all, steady and purposeful, and started opening cells. Sarah came out first, a girl barely 20, skin covered in burn scars from the chains, but her eyes bright and fierce. Marcus followed, older and moving stiffly but alive. Then the others, one after another, emerging from cells that had been their graves. 21 Sin Eaters, free for the first time in months or years. They looked at Lyra like she'd performed a miracle, like she was something other than human. She hated it, but she'd use it. "We need to move," she said. "This place is about to come apart." "Good," Sarah said. Her voice was rough but determined. "Let it burn." They made their way through the compound in a group, and the guards didn't try to stop them, couldn't stop them. The transformed energy radiating off 21 Sin Eaters was too much. Anyone who got close felt their strength drain, their weapons go heavy, their will to fight evaporate. By the time they reached the main gates, word had spread. Vex was waiting with a contingent of guards, but they hung back, keeping distance. "You're making a mistake," Vex called out. "Where will you go? What will you do? You're Omegas, powerless. The moment you step outside these walls, you'll be hunted." "We're not powerless," Lyra said. "You made sure of that when you turned us into Sin Eaters, and now we're going to use what you gave us to tear down everything you built. You think you can fight the councils? All of them? I think we already won. You just haven't realized it yet." Lyra gestured at the compound. Through the windows, light was visible, transformed curse energy still spreading, still changing everything it touched. This place, this system, it only works if it stays secret, and we're about to make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been doing. Vex's face went white. "You wouldn't dare! Watch me." Lyra led the group through the gates and into the night. Behind them, the compound burned. Not with fire. The transformed energy didn't work that way. But it was just as destructive, eating through the binding runes and suppression fields and all the magic that had kept Sin Eaters contained for years. By dawn, there would be nothing left but rubble and evidence. They walked through the darkness. 21 people who'd been told they were expendable, proving exactly how wrong that was. Lyra could feel them at her back, exhausted and hurting but free. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. But it was a start. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked after they'd been walking for an hour. "East," Lyra said. "To the gathering. There's someone I need to meet." "The king you ran away with?" "He didn't run. He chose to leave. There's a difference." Lyra glanced back at the group. "And he's not the only one making choices anymore. We all are." They reached Mira's settlement 3 days before the gathering. Lyra had pushed them hard, knowing the council would be hunting, knowing they needed sanctuary. She needn't have worried. The settlement had transformed in the weeks she'd been gone. Where there had been maybe 20 fighters, there were now hundreds. People from across the frontier, drawn by stories of the Elder who'd sheltered the fugitive king and the Omega who could turn curses into miracles. Kyle met them at the edge of the settlement. He looked different, harder, leaner, like he'd been training for war. When he saw Lyra, his expression cracked into something that might have been relief or rage or both. "You're alive," he said. "So are you." I was starting to think. He cut himself off, jaw tight. "Never mind. You're here. That's what matters." "I brought friends." Lyra gestured at the 21 Sin Eaters behind her. "They're going to testify at the gathering. Tell everyone what the councils have been doing." Kale's eyes widened as he took in the group. "This is going to work. They can't dismiss this many witnesses, can't silence all of you. That's the idea." Lyra swayed slightly, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Kyle caught her before she fell. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "I'll live, but we need to prepare. Vex knows what we're planning. She'll have told the other councils by now. They're going to be ready for us. Let them be ready. We've got 3 days to get these people rested and prepared to speak. And I've been busy too." Kael gestured toward the settlement. "Come see." What Lyra saw made her stop in her tracks. The settlement wasn't just bigger, it was organized. Training grounds, supply depots, a command structure that looked almost military, and the people, they weren't just refugees anymore. They were an army. "You built this," she said, awed. "Mira built it. I just gave people a reason to join." Kael's expression was grim. "Turns out, a lot of people are angry about what the councils have been doing. They were just waiting for someone to stand up first." Mira emerged from the crowd, looking Lyra up and down. "You look terrible." "I've had a rough week." "I can see that." Mira's eyes moved to the group of Sin Eaters. 21. "You freed 21 of them. That's impossible, yes, I've heard." Lyra managed a tired smile. "Can we argue about how impossible it was after I sleep for a week?" "You've got 3 days. Make them count." The settlement rallied around the newcomers. Food appeared. Real food, not prison rations. Clean water. Medical attention for injuries that hadn't been treated in months. Sarah cried when someone gave her fresh clothes. Lyra watched it all from the door of the small house Mira had assigned her, too exhausted to do more than observe. Kael appeared beside her, 2 cups of something hot in his hands. "Tea," he said, offering one. "Mira says you need to stay hydrated." "Mira's bossy." "Mira's kept us alive while you were gone. I'd say that earns her some bossiness." Kael sipped his own tea, watching the settlement with sharp eyes. "You know this is going to get violent, right? Even if we expose the councils at the gathering, even if everyone believes us, they're not going to give up power peacefully." "I know. People are going to die. Probably a lot of people." "I know that too." Lyra looked at him. "You having second thoughts?" "Every day." Kael's smile was bleak. "But then I remember what I saw in that cell, what they did to you, what they're still doing to others, and I remember why we're doing this. Because it's right. Because it's necessary. Right and necessary aren't always the same thing." They stood in silence for a while, drinking tea and watching people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago work together like they'd been doing it for years. "I talked to Sarah," Kael said eventually. "The girl you freed first. She told me what you did, how you connected all of them, taught them to transform their curses together. She said it was like nothing she'd ever felt before. It was terrifying. I bet. But it worked. You created something new, a collective of Sin Eaters working together instead of suffering alone." He paused. "That's going to scare the councils more than anything else we could do." "Good. Let them be scared for once." The gathering was held in neutral territory, a valley in the eastern mountains that belonged to no pack, governed by ancient treaty and older magic. Kael explained the rules as they traveled. No weapons except ceremonial ones, no violence under any circumstances, and every territory got equal voice regardless of size or power. In theory, it was the perfect place to expose the council's crimes. In practice, it was walking into a room full of people who wanted them dead. They arrived with an army at their backs. Not to fight, but to witness. Hundreds of people who'd heard what the councils had been doing and refused to stay silent anymore. The Sin Eaters walked at the front, 21 people whose very existence was proof of systematic torture. The gathered councils saw them coming and reacted exactly as Lyra had expected. Panic followed by fury, followed by desperate calculation. Vex was there, of course, along with Thorn and representatives from a dozen other territories. They stood in a unified block, nobility and power, and centuries of entrenched authority. Against them, one fallen king, 21 freed Sin Eaters, and an army of people who'd decided truth mattered more than tradition. The opening ceremonies were tense. The elder who presided over the gathering, an ancient woman who looked like she'd been carved from granite, called for order and got strained silence instead. Kael stepped forward when his turn came to address the assembly. He'd prepared a speech, Lyra knew, something diplomatic and measured that would ease into the accusations. He threw it away the moment he opened his mouth. My name is Kael Varen. Some of you know me as the Alpha King who abandoned his throne. You've heard stories that I was seduced by dark magic, corrupted by an Omega traitor, driven mad by power. He paused. Those stories are lies, and I'm here to tell you the truth. The crowd stirred. Vex started to stand to object, but the ancient elder gestured her down. Speak, the elder said to Kael, but choose your words carefully. False accusations carry heavy penalties. Then it's fortunate everything I'm about to say is true. Kael gestured toward the Sin Eaters. These people were kidnapped from their homes and communities. They were held in secret facilities, bound with suppression magic, and systematically tortured for months or years. Not because they committed crimes, not because they were dangerous, but because the councils needed someone to carry the darkness they created. This is absurd, Thorn tried to interrupt. I have proof. Kael's voice cut through the objection. Physical evidence, witness testimony, and living examples of what was done to them. He looked directly at Vex. Tell me, counselor, how many Omegas have disappeared from your territory in the last 5 years? How many just vanished and no one asked questions because they were Omegas, and who cares about Omegas? Vex's face was ice. I don't know what you're talking about. Then you won't mind if we examine your compound. The one that burned down 3 weeks ago under mysterious circumstances. I'm sure the remains will tell us nothing incriminating. The crowd was murmuring now, voices rising. Lyra watched representatives from other territories exchange glances, saw recognition dawning on some faces. Thorn stood, his voice shaking with rage. You stand here and accuse the councils of the territories, the very institutions that have kept order for generations, of kidnapping and torture based on the word of Omegas? Of criminals? Based on evidence, Kael corrected, which I'm happy to present. Lyra? This was it. The moment Lyra had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. She stepped forward, felt every eye in the valley turn to her. My name is Lyra Ashen, she began. Her voice shook, but she pushed through it. 4 months ago, I was taken from my home. I was told I'd committed treason, that I'd practiced dark magic. The charges were fake. The evidence was fabricated. I was taken because I was an Omega with no family, no connections, no one who'd make noise if I disappeared. She pulled back her sleeves, showing the silver scars from the binding chains. In the sunlight, they gleamed. I was made into a Sin Eater, forced to absorb every curse, every sickness, every piece of darkness the kingdom wanted to shed. While the capital thrived, I suffered in a cell underground. And I wasn't the first. There were others before me, others who died when their bodies couldn't take anymore. These are lies, Vex started. Then explain the scars. Lyra's voice rang out clear and strong. Explain why I can do this. She held up her hand and let the power show. Light gathered in her palm, not harsh or blinding, but warm and steady. The transformed curse energy she'd learned to control. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This is what happens when you try to make a weapon out of a person, Lyra said. Sometimes the weapon learns to fight back. One by one, the other Sin Eaters stepped forward, showed their scars, told their stories. The crowd listened in stunned silence as 21 voices spoke of torture, of abandonment, of systematic cruelty dressed up as necessity. By the time they finished, even some of the council representatives looked shaken. The ancient elder stood. These are serious accusations. They will require investigation, deliberation. They require immediate action. Kael's voice was steel. These councils have been violating the most basic pact laws, laws against torture, against imprisonment without trial, against using magic to harm instead of protect. If we wait, if we deliberate, more Omegas will disappear. More Sin Eaters will die in secret. And what would you have us do? The elder asked. Dismantle the entire council system? Throw out centuries of tradition on the word of a 21 witnesses, Lyra interrupted, 21 people who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking out. We're already dead in the eyes of the law. We're already traitors. What do we get from lying? The elder was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want? Justice, Kael said simply. A full investigation of every council territory. Release of all Sin Eaters being held in secret, and criminal charges for everyone who participated in or covered up these crimes. That's half the councils in the territories, Thorne said flatly. You're asking us to condemn ourselves. I'm asking you to choose truth over power, for once in your lives. The valley fell silent. Lyra could feel the weight of the moment, the balance tipping. This could go either way. The councils could close ranks, deny everything, use their power to silence the accusations. Or people could choose to believe. The first voice came from an unexpected source, a young council representative from the Western Territories that Lyra didn't recognize. I'd like to see evidence, real evidence, the scars, the compounds, the binding magic. If what you're saying is true, it shouldn't be hard to prove. Agreed, another voice called out. Then another. The consensus was building, not universal. Vex and Thorne and their allies were stone-faced with fury. But enough. Enough people were willing to look, to question, to demand proof. The elder raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. Let it be so. A formal investigation will be conducted. All territories will open their records. Any facilities suspected of holding Sin Eaters will be inspected. And if these accusations are proven true, her eyes swept over the council representatives, there will be consequences. It wasn't everything Lyra had hoped for, but it was more than she'd expected. She felt Kael's hand find hers, squeeze once. A silent message. We did it. First step. Vex stood slowly, her composure fracturing. This is a mistake. You're letting criminals and traitors dictate policy based on emotional appeals and fabricated evidence. When this investigation finds nothing, and it will find nothing, I expect formal apologies and severe consequences for these false accusations. And if the investigation finds exactly what we said it would? Lyra asked quietly. What then? Vex's smile was sharp and cold. Then I suppose we'll all find out what justice looks like. The gathering dissolved into chaos after that, representatives arguing, groups forming and reforming as alliances shifted. Lyra watched it all from the edge of the crowd, exhausted and overwhelmed and oddly numb. Sarah appeared at her elbow. We won. We survived, Lyra corrected. Winning comes later. Still, they heard us. They're listening. That's more than I thought we'd get. More than any of us thought we'd get. They stood together, watching the political machinery grind into motion. It would take time. Investigations didn't happen overnight. But the truth was out there now. In the open, where it couldn't be hidden or buried or forgotten. Kael found them as the sun began to set. We need to leave. Some of the councils are already plotting. Vex has been making quiet alliances. This isn't over. I didn't think it would be. Lyra looked at the 21 Sin Eaters scattered through the crowd, talking to people, telling their stories. But we started something they can't stop. Let's hope you're right. Kael glanced at the sky. Mira's arranged safe houses, different locations for different groups. We'll scatter, make it harder for them to target us all at once. Smart. Practical. There's a difference. He paused. You should know, the investigation might take months, maybe years. This is going to be a long fight. Then it's a good thing we're not going anywhere. Lyra looked out at the valley, at the gathered representatives still arguing about truth and tradition and the cost of both. Somewhere in that crowd were people who'd participated in her torture. People who'd ordered it, facilitated it, profited from it. And now they were being held accountable. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. But it was a start. Sarah touched her arm. We should go, before they change their minds about letting us leave. Yeah, let's go. They walked out of the valley together, 21 sin-eaters and one fallen king, and an army of witnesses who refused to be silent anymore. Behind them, the council scrambled to protect their power. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain and dangerous and full of possibility. Lyra chose to hope. Hope lasted exactly 3 days. The investigations began with public ceremonies and official proclamations. Representatives were assigned. Neutral observers were appointed. The councils made grand speeches about transparency and justice while their lawyers worked overtime to bury evidence and intimidate witnesses. By the end of the first week, 2 sin-eaters who'd testified at the gathering had vanished, just disappeared from their safe houses in the night. No signs of struggle, no traces left behind. Kale punched a hole in Mira's wall when he heard. "They're not even pretending anymore," he said, cradling his bleeding knuckles. "Just taking people in broad daylight and daring us to prove it was them. We need to move faster." Lyra paced the small room they'd been using as a command center. Maps covered every surface, marked with locations of suspected facilities, names of council members, safe routes for refugees. The investigation is a stalling tactic. They're using the time to clean up evidence and eliminate witnesses. So we what? Storm every facility ourselves? Sarah stood by the window, arms crossed. We don't have the numbers, or the weapons, or any actual authority. We have truth, Mira said from her corner, and we have something they don't. What's that? People who give a damn. The old woman stood, moving to the center map. The councils think in terms of power and control. They've forgotten that most people just want to know their families are safe, that their neighbors aren't being tortured in secret, that the system protecting them isn't built on suffering. So we appeal to regular people, Kael said slowly. Go around the councils entirely. Exactly. The investigations are corrupt? Fine. We run our own, document everything, every facility, every witness, every piece of evidence. And then we don't give it to the councils, we give it to everyone. Lyra felt something click into place. You want to expose them publicly, force accountability through pressure from below instead of waiting for justice from above. It's risky, Mira admitted. The councils won't take kindly to being exposed. They'll fight back, hard. Let them. Sarah's voice was cold. I'm tired of hiding, tired of being careful while they murder the people who spoke up. If we're going to do this, let's actually do it. The plan came together over the next 2 weeks. Teams spread across the territories, finding the hidden facilities and documenting what they found. Some compounds had been hastily abandoned, evidence still intact. Others showed signs of being scrubbed clean, but you couldn't erase years of suffering from the walls themselves. The scars remained. Lyra went with the team investigating Vex's territory. She needed to see it, needed to witness what had been done in the name of prosperity. The compound was worse than she'd imagined. They found cells that had held children, omegas as young as 12, taken because they were vulnerable and expendable. The binding runes in those cells were smaller, crueler, designed to cause maximum pain in developing bodies. Lyra stood in one of those cells and felt the last shreds of her mercy die. We're cataloging everything, Marcus said quietly from the doorway. He'd insisted on coming, said he needed to face it. Photos, measurements, samples of the binding magic. The councils can deny all they want, but this, he gestured at the cell, this speaks for itself. Will it be enough? For what? Convictions? Probably not. The councils have lawyers who can argue away anything. Marcus's expression was grim. But for the court of public opinion, yeah, this'll be enough. They spent 3 days documenting the compound, every cell, every torture device, every scrap of evidence. Other teams were doing the same across the territories. By the time they regrouped at Mira's settlement, they had enough material to fill a library. Now what? Sarah asked, looking at the stacks of documentation. We've got everything. How do we get it out? Kale smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I know some people. Merchants who travel between territories, storytellers, town criers. People whose job is spreading information. He pulled out a list. We give them the evidence. All of it. And we ask them to share it everywhere they go. The councils will try to stop them. Let them try. You can't arrest every traveling merchant in the territories. Can't silence every storyteller. Information wants to spread. We're just giving it the opportunity. They distributed the evidence over the course of a month. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then reports started filtering back. Conversations in taverns, arguments in market squares, entire villages holding meetings to discuss what they'd learned. The councils tried to control the narrative, called it propaganda, lies spread by traitors and malcontents. But the evidence was too detailed, too specific, too damning to dismiss easily. Public opinion began to shift. It wasn't universal. Some people refused to believe their leaders could do such things. Others didn't care. What happened to a few Omegas wasn't worth disrupting the social order. But enough people cared. Enough people demanded answers. The council's unified front started to crack. The first defection came from the Western territories, the young representative who'd asked for evidence at the gathering. She released a statement condemning the Sin Eater program and calling for immediate reforms. 2 days later, 3 more representatives joined her. Vex responded by trying to have them arrested for treason. That backfired spectacularly. The arrest warrant sparked protests in 4 territories, small at first, a few dozen people in town squares. But they grew. Within a week, hundreds were marching, then thousands. The councils had a choice: listen to their people or crush dissent with violence. Most chose violence. The crackdown started in Vex's territory. Protesters were arrested, beaten, disappeared. The council called it maintaining order. Everyone else called it what it was: desperation. Kale watched the reports come in and made a decision. We need to go back. Back where? Lyra asked. To my kingdom, the capital. If we're going to force real change, it has to start at the heart of the system. He looked at her. And I think it's time the Alpha King reclaimed his throne. They'll kill you the moment you step foot in the city. Probably. But they'll have to do it publicly now, in front of everyone. And that, Kale's smile was sharp, that's something they can't afford. The journey back was strange. They traveled openly this time, no hiding, no sneaking. Kael in his royal colors, Lyra at his side, surrounded by an army of people who'd decided enough was enough. Word spread ahead of them. By the time they reached the capital's borders, crowds had gathered to see the fallen king return. The council met them at the city gates. Thorn stood at the front, flanked by guards in full armor. Your Majesty, he said, voice dripping false courtesy. How unexpected. We'd heard you were dead. Disappointed? Kale didn't slow his horse. Step aside, counselor. I'm coming home. I'm afraid that's not possible. You abdicated your throne when you fled with a criminal. The council has appointed a regent in your absence. The council doesn't have the authority to appoint anyone. Only the Alpha King can abdicate, and I never did. Kale's voice carried across the crowd. I left to investigate crimes being committed in my name, and now I'm back to hold the guilty accountable. Thorn's composure cracked slightly. You have no proof of any crimes. I have 21 witnesses, dozens of documented facilities, testimony from guards, healers, even some of your own staff who were horrified by what they saw. Kyle leaned forward in his saddle. And I have her. He gestured to Lyra. She'd been quiet until now, letting Kyle lead. But this moment, this was hers. She dismounted and walked forward until she stood directly in front of Thorn. Up close, she could see the fear in his eyes. He recognized her, knew what she represented. You told the king I was a traitor, Lyra said quietly, that I practiced dark magic, that I deserved what happened to me. She pulled back her sleeve, showed the silver scars. These are what deserved looks like. 4 months of torture, of being used as a dumping ground for every curse the kingdom wanted to forget. You were a criminal. I was an Omega with no family and no voice, that's all. That's the only crime I committed. Lyra's voice strengthened. But you made a mistake. You thought breaking me would make me disappear. Instead, it made me dangerous. She held up her hand and let the power show. Light gathered in her palm, brighter than before, more controlled. The crowd gasped. This is what happens when you try to make a weapon out of a person, Lyra said. Sometimes the weapon learns to choose its own targets. The light in her hand flared, then split into 21 separate streams. Each one arced over the crowd and found one of the freed Sin Eaters standing among the people. They glowed for a moment, their own power answering hers. 21 lights in the darkness, 21 witnesses, 21 people who refused to stay silent. The crowd was dead silent. Then someone started clapping, slow at first, then faster. Others joined in. Within moments, the applause was deafening. Thorn's face went white. This is a trick. Dark magic meant to deceive. The only deception here is yours. Kael's voice cut through the noise. You told me the kingdom was thriving because of good leadership. The truth? It was thriving because you were feeding its darkness to innocent people and letting them suffer in secret. He dismounted, standing beside Lyra. That ends today. You can't prove... I can prove all of it, and I will, in front of the entire pack, every crime, every lie, every person who knew and did nothing. Kael's expression was carved from stone. You wanted to keep your power? Fine. But you'll keep it standing trial for what you've done. Guards stepped forward, uncertain. They had orders to arrest Kael to stop this. But between them and the king stood thousands of people who'd come to witness justice. The guards hesitated. Then, one by one, they stepped aside. Thorn saw it happening and broke. You're destroying everything, the system we built, the order we maintained. It kept the kingdom safe. It kept the kingdom comfortable, Lyra corrected, at the cost of people like me, people you deemed expendable. She stepped closer. But we're not expendable. We're not invisible. And we're not going away. The council will never accept this. We have rights, protections. So did we, Sarah called from the crowd. Didn't stop you. Other voices joined in, the freed sin-eaters speaking up, telling their stories right there in the street. The crowd listened, and with every word, the council's position became more untenable. Thorn tried to argue, tried to call for order, for process, for the rule of law. But the law had been on their side when they were torturing Omegas in secret. Now it was just noise. Kael raised his hand, and the crowd quieted. Here's what's going to happen. The council is dissolved, effective immediately. Every member will stand trial for their role in the Sin-Eater program. Neutral judges from outside territories will preside. Full transparency, public proceedings, no closed-door deals. You can't, Thorn started. I'm the Alpha King. I absolutely can. Kael's power rolled out, reminding everyone present exactly what he was. And if you resist, if you try to flee or destroy more evidence or harm one more witness, I will personally ensure your trial is the shortest in pack history. Thorn's hands were shaking. This is tyranny. You're overthrowing the legitimate government. I'm removing criminals from power. There's a difference. Kael looked past Thorn to the other council members hovering behind him. Anyone else want to argue, or can we skip to the part where you surrender peacefully? The silence that followed was answer enough. Guards moved forward. Different guards this time, ones who'd been horrified by what they'd learned, who wanted justice as much as anyone. They took Thorn and the other council members into custody. No violence, no dramatics, just quiet, inexorable accountability. Lyra watched them being led away and felt something loosen in her chest. Not satisfaction. There was too much left to do for that. But relief. They'd done it, actually done it. What happens now? Sarah appeared at her elbow, watching the former counselors disappear into the palace. Trials? Testimonies? Probably months of legal proceedings? Lyra glanced at Kael, who was already surrounded by people asking questions, making demands, seeking guidance. Then we rebuild. Make sure this never happens again. You think it won't? People always find new ways to exploit the vulnerable. Maybe. But now we know what to look for. And we've got people watching. Lyra gestured at the crowd, thousands of regular people who'd learned their kingdom had been built on suffering and decided they wouldn't accept it anymore. That's harder to hide from. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Are you staying? In the capital? For a while. Long enough to see the trials through. Lyra paused. What about you? Don't know yet. Part of me wants to go home, try to find whatever life I had before all this. But Sarah looked at her hands, at the faint glow that still clung to her skin. I'm not the same person anymore. None of us are. No, we're not. They stood together in silence, watching order slowly reassert itself over chaos. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to perfect, but it was better than what had been before. That would have to be enough. The trials took 3 months. They were public, as promised. Every session held in the main square where anyone could watch. Kael presided as Alpha King, but he brought in judges from neutral territories to ensure fairness. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, testimonies, physical proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. The council's lawyers tried every trick they knew, But it wasn't enough. Thorne was convicted first. Torture, conspiracy, abuse of power. The list went on. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a facility with no binding magic, no torture, just walls and time to think about what he'd done. Vex fought harder, argued that she'd been following orders, that the Sin Eater program was tradition, that she'd believed it was necessary for the kingdom's survival. The judges weren't sympathetic. She got the same sentence as Thorne. One by one, the guilty were held accountable. Not all of them. Some had fled, disappearing into territories where extradition wasn't guaranteed. Others died before they could stand trial, suspicious circumstances, but nothing provable. And a few managed to convince juries they'd been misled, victims themselves of a corrupt system. But enough faced justice that the message was clear. This would not be tolerated anymore. Lyra testified twice. Once at Thorne's trial, once at Vex's. Both times, she told her story in clinical detail. The kidnapping, the torture, the curses, all of it. Vex tried to stare her down, tried to make her falter. Lyra stared back and didn't blink once. When Vex was led away after sentencing, she paused at the courtroom door, looked back at Lyra. You think you've won, but there will always be people like me, always be systems that exploit the weak. You can't change that. Maybe not, Lyra said, but I can make sure the weak have weapons next time. Vex laughed, bitter and sharp. Then she was gone. Between trials, there was rebuilding to do. The Sin Eater facilities were dismantled, their binding runes destroyed, their cells turned into monuments. Never forget, Kyle said when people questioned why he didn't just tear the buildings down entirely. We need to remember what happened here. Need to teach future generations why we can never let this happen again. A council was reformed, but different this time. Representatives from every class, alphas, yes, but also betas and omegas. People who'd been invisible under the old system now had voices. It was messy, argumentative, inefficient. It was better. Lyra worked with Mira to establish a network, a way for isolated omegas to report abuse, to seek help, to know they weren't alone. They called it the Silver Chain after the scars Lyra bore. Some people thought it was too on the nose. Lyra didn't care. 6 months after the trials ended, Kyle found her in the palace garden. She'd claimed a corner as her own space, growing herbs and flowers that reminded her of simpler times. There you are, he said, settling onto the bench beside her. I've been looking for you. The new council wants to create an official position, an advocate for omegas, someone who can speak directly to the king, cut through bureaucracy, make sure voices get heard. He paused. They want you to take it. Lyra's hand stilled in the dirt. Me? You're the most qualified person in the kingdom, maybe in all the territories. I'm the most traumatized person in the kingdom. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Kale's expression was serious. You know what it's like. Know what the system does to vulnerable people. Know how to fight it. Who better to make sure it doesn't happen again? Lyra wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him she'd done enough, sacrificed enough, couldn't carry any more weight. But she looked at the garden, at the growth she'd coaxed from wounded earth, and thought about the 21 Sin Eaters scattered across the territories, trying to build new lives. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Name it. I want authority, real authority, not just a title and a seat at meetings. If I see something wrong, I want the power to actually fix it. Kyle smiled. Already written into the proposal. You'll answer directly to me, but you can investigate anyone, question anything, access any records. No restrictions. The nobles are going to hate that. Let them. They don't get a vote on this one. He stood, offered his hand. So? Official acceptance? Lyra took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Official acceptance. But if this goes badly, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. They walked back toward the palace together, and Lyra caught sight of their reflection in a window. A king and an omega side by side. 6 months ago, that image would have been impossible. Now it was just Tuesday. The formal announcement happened the next day. Lyra stood on the palace balcony while Kyle introduced her to the gathered crowd, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as an official representative of the crown with full authority to protect the vulnerable. The crowd's response was mixed. Cheers from some quarters, silence from others. The old guard didn't like it, didn't trust it. But they were outnumbered now by people who remembered what had happened, who'd seen the trials, who wanted change. Sarah was in the crowd, along with most of the other freed sin-eaters. They'd stayed for the announcement, wanting to witness this moment. Afterward, they gathered in a private room to celebrate. "First Omega advisor to the crown," Marcus said, raising a glass. "Hell of a thing." "First official Omega advisor," Lyra corrected. "Pretty sure there were unofficial ones all along. They just didn't get titles or pay." "Still, it's progress," Sarah grinned. "Think you'll actually be able to change things?" "I think I'll try. That's all anyone can do." The celebration went late into the night. Stories were shared, memories honored, plans made for the future. Some of the sin-eaters were staying in the capital, taking jobs or training for new roles. Others were leaving, going home or finding new homes, trying to reclaim lives that had been stolen. All of them knew they'd been changed by what happened, scarred by it, but not broken, never broken. Lyra left the party early, needing air. She climbed to the highest tower in the palace and stood looking out over the city. Lights flickered in windows. People lived their lives, mostly unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. "Thought I'd find you up here," Kyle's voice from the doorway. "Getting predictable in my old age." "You're 23. That's hardly old." He joined her at the railing. "Though I suppose 4 months in a torture cell probably ages you prematurely." "Just a bit." Lyra smiled despite herself. "What are you doing up here? Don't you have kingly duties?" "I delegated. One of the perks of rebuilding a government from scratch. You get to decide which parts to keep." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "Really okay, I mean. Not the diplomatic answer you give in council meetings." Lyra considered lying, considered giving him the easy answer, that she was fine. Everything was fine. They'd won, and that was enough. But she'd promised herself months ago that she was done hiding. "I have nightmares," she said quietly, "about the cell, the chains, the feeling of curses crawling inside me. Some nights I wake up and can't remember where I am, think I'm back there." She paused. "I'm angry all the time. At the councils, at the people who knew and did nothing, at the system that made it possible. And I'm scared that anger is going to eat me alive." "That sounds healthy, actually." "Does it? You went through something horrific. You're allowed to be angry, allowed to have nightmares." Kyle's voice was gentle. "What matters is what you do with it. And you—" He gestured at the city below. "You're turning it into change, into protection for people who need it. That's not being eaten alive. That's being human." Lyra felt something tight in her chest loosen. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city settle into night. Somewhere below, the freed sin-eaters were still celebrating. Somewhere else, former council members sat in cells contemplating their choices. And everywhere, regular people were learning to live in a world where the vulnerable had voices. "I keep thinking about what Vex said," Lyra admitted, "about how there will always be systems that exploit the weak, that we can't change that." She might be right. Probably is right, honestly. Kale's expression was thoughtful. "But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. It means we build better safeguards. Train people to recognize exploitation. Give the weak weapons, like you said. And if it's not enough, if 20 years from now someone finds a new way to hurt people in secret, then the people we trained will fight them, and the generation after that will fight whoever comes next. That's how progress works. Not through one perfect solution, but through constant vigilance and adaptation." Lyra thought about that, about the silver chain and the new council and all the structures they'd built to prevent history from repeating. None of it was perfect, but it was better. And better was worth fighting for. "I'm going to accept the position officially tomorrow," she said. "The advocate role. I want to make sure the new systems actually work. That people like me, people like all of us, don't get forgotten again." "Good. The kingdom needs you. I need you." Kyle paused. "And for what it's worth, I think you're going to be brilliant at it." "You're biased. Completely. Doesn't make it less true." They stayed on the tower until the stars came out, talking about the future. The policies that needed changing, the attitudes that needed challenging, the small victories that would add up to transformation. When they finally descended back into the palace, Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in months, certainty. Not about what would happen. The future was still uncertain, still dangerous, but certainty about her place in it. She'd been told she was expendable, invisible, worth less than the comfort of people who'd never known her name. She'd proved them wrong, not by becoming perfect or powerful or untouchable, but by refusing to disappear, by choosing to stand up, speak out, and force the world to see her. And that was enough. The next morning, Lyra woke to sunlight and the sound of the city coming alive. She dressed in the formal robes they'd given her, dark blue with silver threading, comfortable but official, and made her way to the throne room. The ceremony was simple. Kael read the official proclamation, she swore an oath to protect the vulnerable and seek justice, and that was it. She was now officially the advocate for Omegas, with all the authority and responsibility that implied. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her. Some with complaints, some with questions, some just wanting to meet the woman who'd survived. Lyra listened to each one, took notes, made promises she intended to keep. It was exhausting. It was overwhelming. It was exactly what she'd chosen. During a brief break, Sarah pulled her aside. "You look official. It's weird." "I feel weird." "Good weird or bad weird?" "Both," Lyra smiled. "Definitely both. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're going to change things. Make them better." Sarah hesitated. "I'm leaving tomorrow, going back to my family, if they'll have me." "They will." Lyra pulled her into a hug. "And if they don't, you know where to find me." "Yeah, I do." They held on to each other for a moment, two people who'd survived hell and come out the other side transformed. Then Sarah pulled back, wiped her eyes, and smiled. "Don't let them grind you down," she said. "The nobles and the traditionalists and everyone who thinks Omegas should stay quiet. You're louder than all of them combined. Stay that way." Planning on it. One by one, the freed sin-eaters left the capital. Some stayed in the kingdom, others traveled to distant territories, all of them carrying the story of what had happened and what they'd overcome. Lyra watched them go and felt pride mixed with sorrow. They'd been bound together by trauma, and now they were free to pursue separate paths. It was what they'd fought for, but it was still hard to see them scatter. Marcus was the last to leave, heading north to join Mira's settlement. "Someone needs to help train the next generation," he explained. "Make sure they know how to fight if this happens again." "It won't," Lyra said. "You don't believe that any more than I do." Marcus smiled sadly. "But we'll be ready anyway." After he left, the palace felt emptier. Lyra threw herself into work, learning the intricacies of governance and bureaucracy, and all the thousand small ways systems could be corrupted or exploited. She found problems everywhere. Omegas being denied positions because of tradition, laws that protected the powerful and punished the vulnerable, quiet agreements that maintained the old order under new names. Lyra dismantled them, one by one. It wasn't dramatic. No grand confrontations, no spectacular victories, just slow, methodical work, changing policies, challenging assumptions, forcing people to justify why things had always been done a certain way. The old guard hated her, called her radical, dangerous, ungrateful, said she was destroying centuries of tradition. Lyra thanked them for the compliment and kept working. 6 months into her new role, she received a letter from an Omega in the Eastern Territories. The woman had been removed from her position for insubordination, which turned out to mean she'd reported her alpha for harassment. Lyra read the letter 3 times. Then she packed a bag and traveled east. The situation was exactly as bad as described. The alpha in question had been harassing Omegas for years, protected by friends in local government. When confronted, he'd laughed. He wasn't laughing when Lyra had him arrested. The arrest sparked outrage among the local nobility. Who was she to come into their territory and impose her authority? This was internal business, none of her concern. Lyra showed them her official seal and explained, slowly, clearly, that protecting Omegas was literally her entire job. Then she stayed for the trial, ensuring it was handled properly. The Alpha was convicted. Not harshly, the system still protected its own to some degree, but it was accountability where there'd been none before. Word spread. Other Omegas started writing to her, reporting abuse, asking for help. Lyra couldn't handle all of it personally, so she started training others, building a network of advocates across the territories, people who could investigate and enforce protections at the local level. The silver chain grew from a support network into a force for change. 2 years after the trials, Lyra returned to the dungeon where it had all started. It had been transformed into a memorial, the cells preserved exactly as they'd been, but with plaques explaining what had happened. Names of the sin eaters who'd suffered there, dates, details. Never forget. Lyra walked through the corridors slowly, letting the memories wash over her. The fear, the pain, the desperate hope that someone would notice, would care, would stop it. Someone had. Eventually. Too late for some, but not for everyone. She stopped at her old cell. The chains were still there, rusted and dark, the binding symbols still carved into the walls. But now there was also light. Windows had been cut into the exterior wall, letting sunshine flood what had been darkness. Still hard to look at? Kyle's voice from behind her. Always will be. Lyra didn't turn around. But that's the point, isn't it? It should be hard. Should make people uncomfortable. Otherwise they forget. They're not forgetting. Attendance at the memorial is up every month. Schools bring students here. People come from other territories to see it. He moved to stand beside her. Your story is becoming legend. The Omega who transformed curses and brought down councils. That's not how it happened. Close enough for legend, Kael smiled. Though you're right, it leaves out all the boring parts. The policy meetings, the paperwork, the endless negotiations with stubborn nobles. The actual work of change. The actual work of change, he agreed. They stood together in the cell that had held her, changed her, forged her into something the world hadn't expected. Lyra ran her hand over the silver scars on her wrist. They still glowed faintly, a permanent reminder of what she'd survived. I'm thinking about expanding the advocate program, she said, not just for Omegas, for anyone vulnerable, children, elderly, people with disabilities, anyone the system tends to overlook. That's ambitious. So was everything else we did. Might as well keep the momentum going. Kael laughed. You know the council is going to fight you on this. Let them. I'm very good at fighting councils by now. They left the memorial together, climbing back up into sunshine and fresh air. The city had changed in 2 years. More voices in government, more protections in law, more people who believed the vulnerable deserved dignity. It wasn't perfect. There were still injustices, still exploitation, still people who fell through the cracks. But there were also people watching now. People trained to recognize abuse and empowered to stop it. The silver chain had chapters in every territory and their numbers grew daily. Lyra had built something that would outlast her. That night, she stood on her balcony and looked out over the capital. Somewhere in the city, an Omega was sleeping safely, knowing if something went wrong, there were people who would listen. Somewhere else, a former council member sat in prison, proof that power didn't protect you from consequences. And in the frontier, in the mountains, in cities and villages across the territories, freed sin-eaters were living lives they'd been told they'd never have. Lyra thought about Vex's words, that there would always be systems exploiting the weak. Maybe that was true, but now the weak had weapons, had voices, had proof that standing up could actually change things, and that was the real transformation. Not turning curses into healing, though that was part of it, but turning victims into advocates. Silence into testimony, suffering into strength. Lyra had been told she was expendable, invisible, worth less than the kingdom's comfort. She'd proved them wrong not by becoming invincible, but by refusing to be erased, by choosing every single day to stand up and fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She'd been a weapon. Now she was a shield. And she wasn't done yet. Behind her, the palace hummed with life. Council members arguing, advocates coordinating, Kael probably buried under paperwork and loving every minute of it. This was her world now, messy and complicated and full of problems that didn't have easy solutions. But it was better than the alternative, better than silence and suffering and secrets buried so deep no one would ever find them. Lyra smiled at the city, at the future spreading out before her like an unmapped territory. Then she went inside to plan her next campaign. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in her life, Lyra had the power to actually do it.